Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and this happened in late September of last year, 2024. If you want specifics. I still have nightmares about what I saw in the Goat Rocks wilderness south of Packwood, Washington. I doubt I'll ever sleep soundly again. It all began a week before the actual trip. I was sitting in my cramped one-bedroom in Tacoma, poring over maps of the Cispus Pass area. My best friend, Tasha Lane, had convinced me that we needed a break from the city madness and recommended Goat Rocks. I was hesitant. That area held painful memories for me. My younger brother, Patrick, had loved hiking there before he died in a car crash 2 years ago. We'd never managed to do the loop trail together. But after losing him, I felt drawn to the place. I carried a small urn of his ashes with me, determined to scatter them somewhere serene. Tasha, who had known Patrick well, promised to be supportive. I'd known Tasha for almost a decade. We met in a local cafe back in college. She was a theater kid. Sarcastic, but always ready to help if push came to shove. Beneath her humor, she hid a traumatic childhood. She'd casually mentioned abusive foster homes, but never went into detail. I never pried. I figured she'd tell me if she ever needed to. She could hold her own on the trail, that was for sure, and I trusted her. We left Tacoma on a Friday morning. The plan was a 5-day trek. The first day would be mostly travel by car to the trailhead near Berry Patch, then a hike toward Goat Lake for an initial campsite. On day 2, we'd move closer to Cispus Basin, where I wanted to scatter some of Patrick's ashes. Day 3, we'd explore side trails, maybe see the old fire lookout. Day 4, we'd loop back. Day 5, drive home. Simple. Tasha was humming some pop tune on the drive. "You ready for nature's therapy?" she teased, turning down the car's stereo. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. I patted my backpack in the back seat. That's where I kept the small metal urn. It felt heavier than it should, more like guilt than metal. We arrived at the trailhead just after noon. The weather was gorgeous, crisp air, bright sun, the promise of early autumn coloring the trees. Both of us carried big packs stuffed with gear, freeze-dried meals, water filters, and a Garmin GPS. I didn't trust cell service out here, so I had my phone on airplane mode, planning to conserve battery. Tasha also had her phone. We carried paper maps, too, just in case. The first day passed with minimal drama. The trail was well maintained, and we didn't push too hard. We set up camp near Goat Lake. It was unbelievably quiet at night, the stillness broken only by the occasional wind. I remember shining my flashlight on the water just to see how the beam danced across the surface. A wave of sadness washed over me, thinking of Patrick, but it was bearable. That evening, Tasha tried to lighten the mood, telling ridiculous ghost stories. We laughed, though an odd hush lingered after. I chalked it up to the loneliness of the wilderness. I had no idea how much more alone we'd feel soon. We woke up early on the second day, ate a quick breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, then packed up. As we left Goat Lake behind, I kept glancing over my shoulder. I told myself I was just admiring the view, but there was this nagging sense of unease. We had miles to go, though, so I pushed it aside. That day's hiking was steady and scenic. The sun was out, and the occasional breeze smelled like pine. By mid-afternoon, we climbed toward Cispus Pass, an area of meadows, rocky slopes, and panoramic views that looked like something out of a nature documentary. My mood lifted. I told Tasha I planned to scatter some of Patrick's ashes near a vantage point where you could see Mount Rainier on a clear day. Tasha squeezed my shoulder. "Do what you gotta do, girl. I'm right here." At the pass, the first hint of something wrong with the trip emerged. My phone died while I was taking pictures. The battery had been at 70%, Then the screen just went black. At first, I assumed I'd pressed the power button by accident, but I tried turning it on and nothing happened. Tasha tried calling out to me, though the wind made her voice faint. She waved me over, pointing at the Garmin. It was blinking rapidly and then rebooting itself. "Must be some glitch," I said, frowning. The device restarted, and for the moment, it seemed okay. The battery icon showed full, so I shrugged. We'll just rely on the map if it acts up. We descended from the pass and set up our second camp near a small creek. The night came quickly in the shadow of the mountains. The temperature dropped. We built a campfire, boiled water, cooked freeze-dried lasagna. I remember Tasha telling me about her high school years, how her foster family used to lock her out of the house when she was late. She tried to laugh about it, but it felt forced. Maybe the cold made her nostalgic in a bitter way. I was edgy, but that night ended peacefully enough. I woke up once, hearing a strange rustling outside the tent, but it was probably just a deer. The next morning, though, is when things really started to get weird. On day 3, I woke up shivering. The tent felt absolutely freezing, despite our warm sleeping bags. When I unzipped the flap, I realized the campfire we'd left smoldering was gone. The fire pit was there, but it was filled with moss. Moss soaking in water, as if someone had dumped a bucket onto it. My eyes flicked around, searching for footprints or signs of animals, but the ground seemed undisturbed. Tasha crawled out behind me, cursing softly. "How'd that get there?" she demanded, poking at the moss with a stick. It was dripping wet. We'd had a small, neat ring of rocks around the fire, but they were scattered as if kicked aside. We checked our supplies next. Several of our food items reeked of sulfur. Hard cheese we'd brought had turned into a yellow sludge. A pack of jerky was slimy, discolored. It wasn't just spoiled, it looked corrupted. Our water, at least, seemed okay, so we grudgingly tossed the ruined food into a garbage bag, intending to pack it out. My stomach twisted. This was more than normal spoilage. It hadn't even been that warm overnight. "Animals couldn't have done this," Tasha said, wrinkling her nose at the smell. "This is just weird." We broke camp quickly. Our plan was to hike deeper into the wilderness for some exploring. I'd find a good spot to scatter Patrick's ashes along the way. The tension kept building, though, like some invisible weight pressed down. By noon, we reached a vantage with a beautiful view. The valley below spread out in waves of green ridges, and in the distance I could just make out Mount Rainier's profile. I decided this was the place. Quiet, solemn. Tasha gave me some space while I took out the small metal urn. My brother had always been the adventurous one in the family. He would have loved this trip. I opened the urn, my hands trembling, and let the ashes catch the wind. For a few seconds, tears blurred everything. I thought I saw a shadow move at the edge of my vision, but I was in that grief fog, so I dismissed it. When I turned back, Tasha was waiting with a solemn expression. "He'd be proud," she said softly. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. We started to move again, heading toward our next site. That's when we saw the child. He appeared suddenly on the trail ahead, maybe 100 feet away. A small boy, maybe 7 or 8, barefoot, wearing a ragged t-shirt and dirty pants. He just stood there, staring. Tasha and I exchanged looks. Where the hell did he come from? I called out, "Hey there, are you okay?" The boy looked up with wide eyes. They seemed too dark, almost black in the midday light. Tasha whispered, "This is messed up." Then, louder, she said, "Kid, are you alone?" He didn't answer immediately. After a moment, he approached us, step by careful step. "I'm Jonas," he said in a small voice. His skin was pale, bruised in places with smudges of mud. "I got lost." I felt my heart twist. No child should be out here alone. Tasha, however, seemed more guarded. "Where are your parents?" she asked. The boy shook his head, dropping his gaze. I noticed he had no bag or water bottle, no gear at all. "I can't find them," he murmured. I've been looking for a long time. My maternal instincts, though I'm not a mother, kicked in. We'll help you, I said. I promise. Tasha gently took my arm and whispered, Emily, we should be careful. Something feels off. I understood her hesitation, but a lost kid is a lost kid, right? We couldn't leave him. So we let Jonas walk with us. He refused any food we offered, said he wasn't hungry. He also declined water. I'm just cold, he said softly, shivering. Tasha wrapped him in a spare sweater from her pack, but he never seemed to warm up. We continued hiking for another few hours, slower than planned, hoping to run into other hikers or maybe see signs of a missing child search. The uneasy feeling clung to me. Jonas seldom spoke, and when he did, it sounded old. Something in the cadence of his words was unsettling, as though he was reciting lines he'd memorized, not speaking spontaneously. Just before evening, we reached a relatively flat spot by a small lake for camp. We were all exhausted, physically and mentally. Tasha and I set up the tent while Jonas stood at the water's edge, staring at the lake. The reflection of the sky was a deep orange, but next to him, the water looked black. I told myself I was imagining it. Night fell fast. Tasha and I tried building a fire, but every time we got it going, the flames sputtered, changing color, from the usual yellow-orange to a faint, sickly green. Finally, we got it to a steady burn, though the heat never felt quite right. Jonas sat near it, still hugging himself. He hadn't eaten anything all day. We insisted he at least drink some water, but he turned away. I worried about dehydration, but Tasha's gaze flicked between the boy and me, as if to say, "See? This isn't normal." At bedtime, we only had one tent, big enough for 2 people if we squeezed. There was no way we'd leave Jonas outside alone, so we decided Tasha and I would share one sleeping bag, unzipped to form a blanket, and Jonas would use the other. But Jonas said, "I don't sleep." That was his exact phrase, "I don't sleep." I had to coax him in, telling him he needed rest. I managed to drift off eventually, though I recall Jonas humming. It sounded like a lullaby, but backward, if that makes sense, like the notes were reversed. My half-asleep brain tried to parse it, but I succumbed to exhaustion. In the morning, I woke up freezing again. The tent flap was wide open. Cold air gusted in, smelling of damp earth. My sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside. Tasha was lying half out of her bag, and Jonas's was empty. I felt a jolt of panic and rushed outside, barefoot. Jonas stood maybe 15 feet away, just staring at me. His eyes looked darker than ever. I mumbled something about the cold, then realized Tasha was behind me. She looked furious. "Kid," she snapped, "you can't just wander off." He said nothing. We had no choice but to get on with the morning. That was when we noticed something truly awful. Our backpacks, gone. We found them in the trees about 30 yards away. Ransacked, scattered. Some items were missing, including Tasha's lighter, a few freeze-dried packs, and, disturbingly, my brother's urn. I went pale, frantically searching the undergrowth. Finally, I spotted the urn behind a trunk. It felt heavier. When I pried the lid off, I found it filled with small pebbles and a single child's tooth. The ashes were gone. My stomach turned. I confronted Jonas, though it made no sense. He was just a child, presumably. "Did you touch this?" I demanded. He shook his head, lips trembling. Tasha stepped between us. "Emily, calm down." She turned to Jonas. "Where did you get that tooth? That's not yours, is it?" Jonas gave a blank stare. "I can't remember," he said. Then he just walked away. Tasha pulled me aside. "We have to figure this out. This is not normal, Emily. I'm sorry about Patrick's ashes, but maybe some animal or someone else took them." Deep inside, I felt irrational rage that Jonas might have been involved. But Tasha was right. We had no proof. It was insane to accuse a lost kid of messing with an urn. Yet the nagging fear grew. We salvaged what we could, repacked. So much of our food was gone, and even the rest smelled off. Our small water filter was missing, too. That seemed deliberate. We'd be forced to ration or boil water constantly. We decided to push onward, maybe find a ranger or other hikers. We told Jonas we'd help him get out if he stuck close. I tried not to resent him, but I felt uneasy to the point of nausea. As we walked, Tasha kept shooting me worried glances. Late in the afternoon, Tasha offered to gather wood for a fire early, so we wouldn't freeze again at night. Jonas wanted to follow her, but Tasha said, "Stay with Emily." Off she went, disappearing into the trees. Minutes stretched to an hour, then 2. My watch read almost 6 in the evening. I considered going after her, but Jonas clung to me, and something about leaving the main trail felt dangerous. So I shouted her name periodically. No response. Sunset came. The air grew colder, and the shadows stretched across the forest floor. Jonas stood at the edge of my lantern's glow, arms wrapped around himself. He was humming again, that backward lullaby. I asked him to stop, but he just kept humming, staring at me with those dark eyes. My skin crawled. Finally, I told him to stay put. I was going to look for Tasha. He said, "She's already back." That froze me in place. "What do you mean, Jonas?" He pointed to the darkness behind me. I spun around, shining my lantern. Sure enough, Tasha stood there, shoulders hunched, hair covering half her face. "Tasha?" I whispered, stepping toward her. She turned to me with this weird, elongated smile. Her eyes were dull, like she was in a trance. She blinked once, very slowly. "Tasha, are you okay? Where have you been?" I demanded. She just stared. I reached out, gently touching her arm. Her skin felt cold and clammy. "I found a shortcut," she murmured. Her voice was flat, no inflection. "It's better there. Everything is quiet." My heart pounded. She wasn't making sense, and I noticed her hair was damp, as if she'd been in water. "Did you fall?" I asked. "Are you hurt?" She smiled again, too wide. "No," she said softly. Then she walked past me toward the tent, rummaging inside. "Where is the pot?" she asked, emotionless. "I need it." I tried to question her, but she just repeated the demand until I gave her the small cooking pot. She hugged it to her chest and stared at Jonas. The boy approached. He looked at Tasha with a calm, unreadable expression. Then they both fixed their gaze on me as if I was intruding on their moment. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Okay, Tasha," I said, trembling. "Why don't you sit down? We can talk." She barely acknowledged me. She placed the pot on the ground, then started picking up random sticks, piling them inside. The pot was tiny, so the sticks stuck out. It made no sense. Jonas observed with an almost clinical focus. Night fully descended. The temperature sank to near freezing. We had no real firewood because Tasha had disappeared with our best chance at gathering any. I decided to try anyway, collecting fallen branches around the area. Tasha and Jonas made no move to help. They just stood there, silently. Every time I looked at Tasha, she wore that strange grin, blinking far too little. Finally, after an hour, I managed to get a small fire going. I crouched near it, warming my hands. Jonas stepped forward, standing on the opposite side of the flames. He whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I stared at him, not sure I'd heard correctly. "What did you say?" He didn't answer. Then Tasha slowly walked over, set the cooking pot on a rock, and crouched beside Jonas. The two of them reminded me of statues. I heard her whisper to him, but I couldn't catch the words. My heart hammered so loudly in my chest that I was half afraid it'd leap out. We slept in tense shifts. Tasha refused to go inside the tent, staying just outside it, cross-legged, pot in front of her. Jonas hovered near her like a silent sentinel. I felt dizzy from fatigue, but fear kept me awake. At some point I must have drifted off, though. I startled awake to see Tasha's face inches from mine. Her eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. "I forgot my sister's name," she whispered, lips barely moving. "You remember, don't you, Emily?" "Tasha," I breathed. "You don't have a sister." She stared at me for a long moment, then smiled that too wide grin. "Right," she said, leaning back. "I keep forgetting." Morning brought no relief. We discovered more disconcerting changes. The Garmin read nonsense coordinates, and the date flashed erratically. My watch showed it was nearly noon, but the sky looked more like early morning. The sunlight felt thinner somehow. "We need to get out of here," I told Tasha. She nodded slowly, still wearing that vacant smile. Jonas watched us with intense focus. "There's a man up ahead," Jonas said suddenly, pointing up the trail. "He's looking for you." Then he giggled, a sound devoid of any real childlike warmth. I was so desperate for an ally, I hiked up the trail alone, ignoring Tasha's blank expression. Sure enough, I spotted a figure leaning against a boulder. Closer inspection revealed a man in his mid-30s, wearing well-worn hiking gear. He had a small day pack, a sun-beaten face, and a worried look in his eyes. He introduced himself as Luke Romero, said he was from Seattle, backpacking solo. I poured out the whole situation, the missing gear, Tasha's odd behavior, Jonas's presence. Luke looked grim. "I've seen that boy," he muttered. "Jonas, you said?" "Yeah, I ran into a kid by that name a few years back. Same area." My blood ran cold. "But he'd be older now, right?" Luke shook his head. "I don't know what he is, but he's not just a lost kid." He glanced around as though afraid Jonas might pop up behind him. "Last time, my sister was with me. I barely got out. She didn't." His eyes were haunted. I didn't know what to say, but I pleaded for his help. He agreed, though he seemed terrified. "We have to keep moving," he said. "If we stay in one place too long, it's like he can twist everything. Time, your senses. He feeds on your grief, your fear." It sounded crazy, but after everything we'd seen, I couldn't dismiss it. I led him back to where I'd left Tasha, dreading the worst. On the way, we tried to formulate a plan to exit the wilderness quickly. Luke had a partial map, but he said it might not help if Jonas was interfering. As we neared the campsite, I heard a soft humming. Jonas was perched on a fallen log, Tasha kneeling beside him like a worshiper. I hurried to Tasha's side, relieved to see she was alive. She looked up at me and said, "He told me a secret." I swallowed. Luke startled when he saw Tasha's expression. He whispered to me, "She's not all there." I nodded, lips pressed tight. Jonas stared at Luke, tilting his head. "You came back," he said in a sing-song voice. "They always come back." Luke paled. "Yeah, well, not for long." He turned to me, his voice low. "We gotta move now. Keep Tasha with you. Don't let her out of your sight." I tried to coax Tasha to stand. At first, she stayed on her knees, gripping the pot. After some pleading, she rose unsteadily. We started hiking quickly, leaving Jonas behind. At least, we thought we did. As we climbed a rocky rise, Tasha lagged behind. She mumbled nonsense about a shortcut again. Luke tried to help me hustle her along. The sky above felt wrong, like the sun was stuck at midday no matter how long we walked. My watch read 4 p.m., but the shadows seemed frozen. Eventually, we found a narrow clearing. We stopped to decide whether to go left or right. Then Tasha stiffened, turned abruptly, and drove the jagged edge of the pot into Luke's chest. I screamed as he staggered back, blood pouring from him. Tasha didn't even blink. She yanked out the pot, spattering red droplets across her own face. Luke collapsed. I dropped to my knees, pressing on the wound. Tasha stepped back, her eyes glassy. Jonas appeared behind her, silent. It was as if he materialized from the shadows. "He doesn't belong here," Jonas said softly, voice echoing with an odd pitch. Tasha, what have you done? I sobbed, trying to stop the bleeding. Luke's eyes bulged with shock. He grabbed my hand weakly. "Run," he croaked. "Don't let him." Then his voice died, replaced by a rattling breath. Tasha took a step toward me, pot still in her grip, dripping blood. Jonas just stared with that blank, old gaze. Fear jolted through my system. I had to run. Maybe I should have tried to help Luke more, but he was gone. His eyes had gone glassy, chest unmoving. I stumbled away, and Tasha lunged. Her fingernails raked my arm, but I jerked free. I fled downhill, adrenaline roaring in my ears. My sense of direction was shot, but I knew I had to get away from them, from Jonas. Branches whipped my face, and I nearly fell multiple times over rocks and roots. Eventually, I stopped in a thick stand of trees, panting, sweat cold on my skin. I looked back. No sign of Tasha or Jonas. My body shook from the realization that Tasha, my best friend, had murdered someone. Darkness came, though the sky was still strangely lit, a bluish twilight that wouldn't fade. The temperature plummeted. I found a half-fallen log to huddle under for some shelter. My mind raced. Where was the trail? How could I escape? The Garmin was in Tasha's pack. My phone was still dead. Even if it worked, I doubted I'd find a signal. I felt desperate enough to scream for help, but part of me feared that they would hear me. I tried to calm myself, thinking about any landmarks we'd passed. If I could find Walloped Lake or get near Packwood Lake, maybe I'd encounter other hikers or a ranger. My water supply was dangerously low, and my food was basically gone. My foot ached from twisting it in a frantic jump over a boulder. That night blurred in a haze of half-sleep, nightmares, and snapping twigs that made me bolt upright. I heard voices sometimes, familiar ones. My brother's voice, Tasha's laugh. Once it sounded like Luke calling out for me. I lay there, heart pounding, tears in my eyes, knowing these illusions were part of the wilderness turning against me, or Jonas turning it against me. I had no way to be sure. When I dared open my eyes at dawn, if it was truly dawn, the sky had a sickly, gray cast. My watch said it was Nainwak a.m. I guessed it must have been day 4. My entire body ached. I forced myself to stand and keep moving, heading southwest if my sense of direction hadn't betrayed me. I wandered for hours, thirst gnawing at me, hunger cramping my stomach. Occasionally, I found small streams trickling through the rocks. I boiled water in an old tin cup I found in my pack, miraculously it was still there, using a small pocket stove. But the stove's flame looked wrong, flickering greenish edges. The water tasted bitter, but it was enough to stave off dehydration. Sometime in the afternoon, I stumbled upon a bizarre sight. An altar of sorts, made of stacked rocks and bleached animal bones, covered in moss. I nearly gagged at the stench of decay. My brother's urn sat in the center of the structure, upright, looking undamaged. I froze, a wave of horror rolling over me. Behind the altar was Jonas. His face was pale, eyes black pits, lips parted in the faintest grin. "I'm so cold," he said. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Then Tasha stepped into view behind him. She looked worse than before. Sunken cheeks, dark circles, eyes red with burst blood vessels. She cradled that pot in her arms like a precious doll. Her shirt was still stained with Luke's dried blood. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed. I realized I couldn't run. Tasha blocked one side, Jonas the other, the altar behind them. "You stole my brother's ashes," I finally managed to say, voice shaking. "Give them back." Jonas gave a childlike tilt of the head. "I never took them," he whispered. "He gave them to me. Your grief. So delicious." Tasha let out a soft, manic giggle, though the laugh seemed to tear her throat. I took a step back, my ankle nearly giving out. Then I saw Tasha's face crumple for a split second, a flicker of recognition. She looked at me with panic. "Emily, run!" she gasped. Immediately, Jonas's small hand clutched her wrist and her expression went vacant again. My heart hammered. I didn't budge. Something in me snapped. I'd lost too much. My brother, the comfort of safety, Luke's life. I wasn't going to let this demon, or whatever he was, keep Tasha if there was anything left of her to save. Jonas smiled, revealing teeth that looked longer, sharper. "Give me your hand," he said. His voice sounded old, hollow. Without thinking, I reached into my jacket pocket for the small metal bottle of stove fuel, kerosene. My fingers tightened around it. "You want my hand?" I muttered. "Here." I lunged, uncapping the bottle. Jonas's eyes widened. I doused him with a flammable spray. He shrieked, a high, piercing wail that made my ears ring. Tasha stumbled backward, dropping her pot. My brother's urn clattered off the altar. Jonas tried to run, but I'd already flicked a lighter, a cheap, half-broken backup I'd found in my pack. The flame caught, igniting his shirt. He screamed, and for a brief instant, his form shimmered, like a mirage. The child's outline fell away, replaced by something skeletal, twisted, with bark-like skin. The stench of burning hair and flesh choked me. Tasha screamed, doubling over, covering her ears. "No," she sobbed. "He's in my head." I watched, horror-stricken, as Jonas writhed in flames. His limbs flailed, hitting the altar, knocking bones aside. The entire structure collapsed with a clatter of rocks and bone fragments. The urn toppled over, rolling toward me. In that moment, Jonas's face locked eyes with me, his features still half-human, half-monstrous. He let out a final shriek that echoed in my mind, and then he fell silent. A split second later, Tasha let out a guttural scream, so raw it hurt my chest. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her skull as if it was going to split open. I rushed forward, ignoring the heat and smoke. "Tasha, I'm here," I panted, my hand on her shoulder. She stared up at me, tears streaming, mouth hanging open. "What have I done?" she rasped, voice broken. "Oh God, Emily, I killed him. That man, Luke. I couldn't stop myself, I'm sorry." Her hands trembled violently, but there was no time to comfort her properly. The flames had spread to the moss, creeping outward. Jonas's body was still burning, a foul, black smoke curling upward. I coughed, feeling my lungs burn. "We have to get out of here," I said, trying to pull Tasha to her feet. She was weak, barely able to stand. We stumbled away from the blaze. The forest around us was damp enough that it probably wouldn't start a full wildfire, but the smoke was thick. Tasha leaned on me heavily. She sobbed off and on, muttering apologies. I half-carried her, adrenaline fueling me, ignoring the racking pains in my own body. We moved downhill, away from the altar site. At some point, Tasha collapsed again, her breath ragged. I checked her pulse, feverish, erratic. "We'll find help," I murmured, though I had no idea how. She tried to speak, but only blood bubbled from her lips. I realized she must have had internal injuries, maybe from Jonas's hold or from something else that had happened while she was missing. "No, no, no, Tasha," I begged, gripping her hand. She looked at me, eyes clouding. "Emily, I'm sorry," she whispered, and then she exhaled and went still. My best friend was gone. I collapsed in despair, tears streaming down my face. I stayed there for minutes, hours. Time had no meaning anymore. Eventually, the survival instinct kicked in. I knew if I lingered, I'd die too, maybe from exposure or hunger. I forced myself to close Tasha's eyes. It was all I could do. My entire body felt numb. That might have been day 5, or maybe it was still day 4. I couldn't tell. I hobbled onward, leaving Tasha's body behind because I simply couldn't carry her. My mind reeled with guilt, but I'd lost everything. My water was almost gone, my ankle was swelling with every step, and my spirit felt broken. At some point, the sky darkened. I slipped on a rocky ledge, tumbling several feet. My leg twisted beneath me with a sickening snap. Agony lanced through me. I tried to stand and collapsed, shouting in pain. Hot tears burned my cheeks. I crawled, inch by inch, determined not to die out there. Every movement was torture. I had no idea where I was going. My watch read 3:00 a.m., but the sky was still that eerie twilight. I must have blacked out. When I regained consciousness, I heard voices. Real human voices calling, "Hello, anyone there?" Summoning my last shred of will, I croaked, "Help!" and waved my arms feebly. A figure emerged from the brush, an older park ranger, face etched with concern. "Hold on, miss," he said, kneeling beside me. I remember sobbing with relief as he lifted me, calling out to someone named Daniel to bring a stretcher. They carried me out. The pain was excruciating, and I drifted in and out of consciousness. I vaguely recall being put in an ambulance, bright lights stabbing my eyes, a flurry of medical questions. I tried to tell them about Tasha, about the boy, Jonas, about Luke. I'm not sure if they believed me. I only remember the paramedics saying, "We'll let search and rescue know." When I woke again, I was in a hospital in Yakima. My leg was in a cast. A doctor asked me gentle questions, but I barely responded. My mind was stuck on Jonas's face, Tasha's final broken expression. I learned from a nurse that they'd found me near Wallop Lake, over 15 miles from where I last remembered being. There was no mention of bodies discovered. I had no idea if they recovered Tasha's remains or Luke's. Perhaps the wilderness kept them. A day later, after surgery, I was resting in a hospital bed when I noticed something in my bag, which a ranger had brought in. My brother's urn. It was intact and sealed. I stared at it, heart pounding. No one could explain how it got there. They'd found me with practically nothing. No pack, no map, just me and a broken leg. So how did the urn survive, intact? I tried to open it, but the lid wouldn't budge. Something about that made me want to scream. The nurse came in to check on me, and I hid the urn under the blankets. I didn't want to deal with any more questions. It wasn't until weeks later, back at home, that I tried prying it open with a hammer and chisel, only to find it empty. No ashes, no pebbles, no tooth. Just emptiness. The nightmares haven't stopped. Every time I close my eyes, I hear Jonas humming that lullaby in reverse, see Tasha's vacant stare, see Luke's final desperate face. Even after physical therapy, I walk with a limp. The mental scars run deeper. I told the authorities a vague story. Got lost, friend missing, attacked by animals. I figured they wouldn't believe the truth. Sometimes I question my sanity. Perhaps I hallucinated it all. But late at night I feel eyes on me, sense a child's presence in my room. Once I even found small, muddy footprints under my window, leading away into the yard. I plastered over them, telling myself it was just a dream. But the next morning, my footprints were still there, next to the small ones. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that Jonas is still out there, still cold, still feeding on people's grief. Maybe he's found someone new to follow. Maybe Tasha's spirit is a prisoner in that lonely stretch of wilderness. Or maybe it was all some horrific manifestation of my own guilt. The doctor said trauma does things to the mind. But if that's true, how do I explain the urn, or the footprints, or the child's tooth I found in my pocket one random morning months later? All I know is I survived. Broken bones, shredded nerves, shattered memories. I'll never be the same. The goat-shaped ridges and rocky spires of that wilderness still haunt me. Some nights, in the half-dark of my bedroom, I hear a child's whisper, "I'm so cold." I shut my eyes tight and remind myself I escaped, that I crippled the demon and burned him to cinders. But deep down, I'm never sure if it's truly over, because sometimes the darkness in my room doesn't feel empty. Sometimes I can almost see him standing at the foot of my bed, barefoot, eyes black as night, smiling with that ancient grin. And I wonder, did I really escape, or did I just bring him home with me? My name is Matt Bricker. I'm 32 years old, a high school biology teacher from Tacoma, Washington. This happened in August of 2024. If you knew me today, if you saw the scars, the way my eyes reflexively dart to the shadows, you'd understand this is not a story told lightly. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Even now, retelling it makes me feel like a madman. But I know what I saw, felt, smelled, touched, and tasted out in the Hoh rainforest. I decided to hike into Olympic National Park because of what happened to my younger brother, Aaron, the year before. He was my best friend, only 4 years younger but worlds apart in personality. He died on a hiking trip out by the Hoh River. Search and rescue teams never found his body, only scraps of his clothing near a rocky outcrop and footprints that ended abruptly. For months, I'd asked every local hiker and park ranger about him. No one had any answers. I couldn't let it go. So, near the end of August, on a whim fueled by grief and a gnawing guilt, I asked 2 people to join me. Jessica Ward, she goes by Jess, and Devin Green. Jess taught history at the same high school where I worked. We'd become friends over late-night grading sessions and occasional staff happy hours. She was 29 and had a sharp wit that sometimes felt like a steel trap. She never lacked a snide remark, but that humor covered an empathetic heart. She agreed to come along because I suspect she was worried about me. Devin was Jess's cousin, a 35-year-old mechanic from Seattle who liked boasting about his survival skills. He was the sort of guy who believed raw confidence could bulldoze any obstacle. I'd known him a bit in high school. He was 1 year above me and carried himself like he owned every hallway he walked. He used to give me wedgies and push me into lockers, but he'd claim now that it was just jokes. I never liked him. Still, I needed an extra set of hands. And, if I'm honest, I wanted someone who wouldn't scare easily. I also brought my golden retriever, Duke. He was 6, with a gentle temperament but protective instincts when he sensed danger. He'd once chased away a stray dog that tried to bite me on a walk. Although he was no trained attack dog, I felt safer having him by my side. And Duke loved hiking. He'd start wagging his tail as soon as he saw my boots and backpack. That was our group. Me, Jess, Devin, and Duke heading into the heart of the rainforest. The plan was to camp 3 days in, near the part of the park that was closest to where Aaron had disappeared. I told them I wanted to see if there were any clues left, maybe remnants overlooked by the official search. They humored me. Looking back, I wish they hadn't. We left Tacoma on a gray morning, layering our vehicles at a turnout near the park's entrance. Jess drove her blue SUV, which was crammed with tents, supplies, extra clothes, and 2 large water jugs. I drove my old Jeep and let Devin ride with me so Jess could get some last-minute work calls done in her own car. We planned to leave my Jeep in a designated parking area and then travel together in the SUV to the trailhead. The first few hours were uneventful. Washington's gloom felt strangely comforting, a thick blanket of overcast skies and drizzling mist. The big trees soared overhead, their trunks clad in moss, the ground spongy from rainfall. Ferns fanned out along the forest floor like green peacocks. The air smelled clean, mixed with the scent of wet earth. At the parking area, Jess hopped out of her SUV. "We sure about this, guys?" she asked, glancing at the threatening sky. "We could always do a shorter loop, or, something with fewer ways to get lost." Devin snorted. "Scared? Come on, it's just the Hoh. I've done far worse." He gave me a playful nudge, but his eyes were on Jess. He wanted to impress her. Typical Devin. I forced a thin smile. "I'm set on going deeper. If either of you wants out, now's the time." Jess hesitated. I caught her looking at me, reading my expression, maybe noticing the tension in my jaw. She knew how personal this was. "I'm in," she said, her tone resigned but supportive. We loaded our packs, took a quick break to consult the map, and started hiking. I clipped Duke's leash to my belt in the busier sections near the visitor center, but once we were off the main tourist path, I let him roam free. He bounded ahead, sniffing mossy trunks, his golden tail wagging furiously. We planned about a 7-mile trek the first day, setting up camp in a clearing near one of the quieter stretches of the Ho River. Things started going wrong a couple of hours in. I remember the exact moment. Devin was fiddling with his phone. He wanted to document the trip on social media. He frowned, shook it, cursed. "Battery's at like 10%, he said. "I charged it all night." Jess checked hers. "Mine's not showing any signal. Battery's dropping fast, too." I pulled out my own phone, a decent model with a brand new battery. It was at 15%. That was impossible. It had been at a full charge in the parking lot. "That's weird," I muttered, double-checking. I switched it off to preserve what little was left, instructing the others to do the same if they wanted any battery for emergencies. Jess shrugged, turned hers off. Devin left his on for a few more minutes, trying to see if he could catch a single bar of signal. No luck. We brushed it off as a fluke, or maybe we'd all used too much battery taking pictures on the drive in. It felt strange, but not alarming. We pressed on. The deeper we got, the more quiet everything became, as if the forest muffled sound. Even the wind in the canopy seemed hushed. Duke, normally a lively explorer, started to lag behind after about 3 miles. He'd look back over his shoulder at intervals, ears pinned back, tail low. "Come on, boy," I coaxed. He hesitated, then trotted up to me, pressing his flank against my leg. He was scared. Of what? I had no idea. But that uneasy tension spread to me, too. We reached our planned campsite just before dusk. It was a small clearing ringed by enormous Sitka spruces, the forest floor carpeted with ferns and moss. The river, maybe 50 yards away, provided a dull, comforting roar. We set up our 2 tents, Jess and I in one, Devin in the other. Usually, I preferred my own tent, but Jess insisted we share because she didn't fully trust Devin, and neither did I. As the sun's light faded, we gathered some deadwood for a fire. Duke stuck to my side while we scrounged for fuel. "We need enough to get through the night," Jess said. "It'll be a cold one if it rains." Devin smirked, patting a small hatchet at his side. "I'll go deeper into the trees, find some better logs." He set off before either of us could protest. With my arms full of dry branches, I returned to the clearing and stacked them in the ring of stones that presumably some other camper had used. Jess rummaged in her pack for a fire starter. "Hey, Matt, is it cool if we talk about, your brother? Or would you rather not?" she asked quietly. I paused, exhaling. "It's fine. That's why I'm here." "How sure are you that we're near where it happened?" "Very sure," I said. "Aaron took a side trail from the main path not far from this area. It's borderline backcountry. That's why rescue teams never pin down an exact location." She nodded, eyes flicking away as if worried about pressing me too hard. "We'll keep our eyes open for any sign, I promise." Duke whimpered. We both looked at him. His hackles stood up, ears flattened. He stared into the wall of trees where Devin had disappeared. "You worried about Devin?" Jess asked, forcing a laugh. "I don't blame you." 15 more minutes passed and Devin still wasn't back. Jess decided to start the fire anyway, scraping her lighter along the fire starter. The tinder and kindling ignited, but the flames glowed an odd greenish hue for a moment before settling into a normal orange. "That's unusual," Jess muttered. "Could be some chemical in the wood or fungus." We kept adding fuel, but the fire felt temperamental, like it might snuff out at any second. I hovered close, blowing gently on the embers, trying to keep it going. The entire time I had this creeping sensation like I was being watched from multiple angles. Just as the darkness fully claimed the sky, Devin came crashing back into the clearing. He dumped a few logs on the ground, panting. "Where the hell were you?" Jess demanded. "It's been more than half an hour." Devin frowned, wiping sweat from his brow. "What are you talking about? I wasn't gone more than 10 minutes. I just circled around the big spruce. You saw me, didn't you?" I exchanged a glance with Jess. We both had the same thought. He was gone a lot longer than 10 minutes. But I bit my tongue. "All right, no big deal. We've got enough firewood for tonight," I said, trying to smooth it over. Devin's eyes flicked to the flames. For a second, the dancing light painted his face in a sickly hue, making him look older, drawn. A trick of the flickering firelight, I told myself. Then he was back to normal, a cocky grin curling his lip. We shared a simple dinner of dehydrated meals. The weirdness of the evening hung like a cloud over us, but we forced some conversation about random staff gossip, Jess and I, and car modifications, Devin. After a while, Jess yawned pointedly, making an excuse to turn in early. It had been a long day. I followed her lead, coaxing Duke into the tent. Devin stayed by the fire, occasionally poking the embers with a stick, as though he were waiting for something. I woke in the middle of the night to a rustling sound outside the tent. It might have been an animal. Our campsite was pretty far into the wilderness, so elk or raccoons wouldn't be surprising. I unzipped the tent, shining my flashlight around. Nothing. The fire was almost out, just a few glowing coals and a bed of ash. Devin's tent was zipped up, presumably with him inside. Duke was curled up at my feet, eyes half open, as if uncertain whether to be alarmed. Jess didn't stir, just kept breathing steadily. Telling myself I was probably just spooked, I settled back into my sleeping bag. But the moment I closed my eyes, I heard something again, like a wet, scraping sound, or the distant echo of a shriek. The hair on my arms stood on end. I couldn't place it. Still, exhaustion eventually claimed me. Morning came gray and damp. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, hoping to greet a normal day. Instead, I saw that Devin's tent was open. Nobody inside. The ashes of the fire looked scattered, like something had pawed through them in the night. A rancid smell lingered in the clearing, hard to identify, but vaguely like decaying seaweed. "Devin?" I called, my voice echoing weirdly among the trees. A jolt of worry shot through me. Was he gathering more wood already? Jess climbed out of our tent, rubbing her eyes. "He's gone," she asked, looking around. "Weirdo. Maybe he went to wash up by the river." We found him about 30 yards away, kneeling by the water's edge, staring intently at the swirling current. Duke ran up to him, sniffing the ground, but whimpered and backed off. Devin didn't acknowledge us, just kept his gaze fixed on the water. "Hey, man," I said, stepping closer. He turned his head slowly. Too slowly. His face was pale, dark bags under his eyes as if he hadn't slept. "Morning," he said quietly, almost monotone. Jess gave him a skeptical look. "You okay, Devin?" He shrugged. "I'm fine, just thought I saw something." Then he abruptly smiled, holding the expression a beat too long. "Good day for a hike, right?" I felt a shiver ripple across my back. His smile wasn't in his eyes, and he didn't blink once during that entire exchange. We returned to the campsite to get breakfast, but another surprise greeted us there. The 2 sealed Tupperware containers that Jess had packed, a simple meal of leftover pasta, were open and crawling with maggots. An impossible amount of them. There was no way so many had hatched overnight, especially inside sealed plastic. The sight and smell made me retch. Jess cursed. "I packed that in a cooler bag. There's no way." Her eyes were wide, searching my face for some rational explanation. I had none. I reminded myself that wilderness can be unpredictable, but this was beyond logic. We had backup meals, dehydrated oatmeal, and boiled some water on our camp stove. Duke kept sniffing the rotted food, then skittered away as if it frightened him. Devin sat on a log, arms resting on his knees, watching. He looked spaced out, not offering any commentary. It was unnerving to see him so quiet. After eating, we decided to check the map and plan the next stretch. I pulled it from my pack, smoothing it out on the ground. But something wasn't right. The shape of the river bend near our campsite didn't match the topographical lines. It was like the terrain itself had shifted. Jess double-checked with a second map from her phone's offline data. Her battery was nearly dead, but we could see enough to confirm the mismatch. "How the hell is that possible?" she asked, frustration creeping in. "We haven't gone off course, right?" I frowned. "Not that I know of." My instincts screamed that we'd come exactly where I wanted, near Aaron's last known location. Yet the landmarks refused to line up with the map. Devin, suddenly alert, cleared his throat. "Maybe we took a turn earlier, or one of you read the map wrong." His tone rankled me. "I don't think so," I said, but I couldn't prove it. Everything was off and we had no phone battery or functional GPS to confirm. Eventually, we decided to push deeper, trying to circle around to a vantage point that might let us visually locate the correct bend of the river or any recognizable rock formations. As we packed up camp, I noticed Jess studying Devin. He was fiddling with the strap of his backpack, occasionally glancing at her with that same too long smile. She shuddered. When she caught my eye, her expression was clear. Something is wrong with him. By midday, we were struggling with thick underbrush and twisted vines. The undergrowth made it slow going, our boots sinking into black mud. The canopy above was so dense that daylight filtered through in a greenish haze, giving everything a haunting hue. The temperature felt oddly cold for August. Duke was panting, whining softly. Every few minutes he'd stop and stare behind us, as if expecting something to leap out. At one point, Jess tripped over a root and fell hard, scraping her knee. She let out a yelp, and I helped her up. Devin just watched, expressionless, before eventually extending a hand too late. We took a rest break near a large, mossy log. While Jess patched her knee with a bandage, I rummaged in my pack for a snack. That's when I noticed my sealed bag of trail mix was moldy, green fuzz blanketing the nuts and dried fruit. Devin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an energy bar, offering me half. I hesitated, but hunger won out. I took it, forcing a smile of thanks. He gazed at me blankly. Then his lips twitched into that odd grin again. "No problem, buddy," he said. Jess's wide eyes darted between us. She didn't say a word, but I knew she was thinking the same thing. Where did the normal Devin go? We continued hiking. The first real panic set in when I realized my watch had stopped. It showed 2:14 p.m., no matter how many times I tapped it. Jess's watch did the same, though it was stuck at 3:05 p.m. We argued about the real time for a bit until we gave up. The sky overhead offered no clue. We'd lost all sense of how far or fast we'd traveled. By the time we stumbled onto another open area, the sun was near the horizon, or so I guessed. "Let's make camp here," Jess said, massaging her sore thigh. "I'm exhausted." Devin said nothing, just started setting up his tent in a mechanical, practiced way. We were next to an old, gnarled spruce that looked dead, its bark flaking off in long curls. The ground was spongy and somewhat level. We made a fire with the last bit of kindling we had collected along the way. The flames acted erratic again, sometimes guttering as if choked by an invisible wind. Once or twice it flared green, sending sparks that made us jump. Jess seemed determined to lighten the mood with forced banter, but her attempts fell flat. We each retreated into our own anxious thoughts. Eventually, we slid into our tents. I tried to get Duke to come inside, but he resisted, growling at Devin's tent across the campsite. I had to practically drag him in. I listened to Jess's breathing, deep and steady with exhaustion, and let the endless hush of the forest lull me to sleep. I had a dream, or maybe it was more like a vision, where I heard Aaron calling me. "Maddie," he said, voice echoing between giant trunks draped in moss. "Help me." He stood at the edge of a dark ravine, the ground crumbling under his feet. When I tried to run to him, the soil gave way, and I fell, my stomach lurching as I plunged into infinite blackness. Then the dream twisted into a horrifying image of a pale figure with an open mouth, screaming but making no sound. I jolted awake, heart hammering. Jess was sitting upright in her sleeping bag, shaking my shoulder. "Matt," she whispered, voice trembling, "where's Duke?" I blinked, realized the dog wasn't curled at my feet. The tent flap was slightly open. A sense of dread punched me in the gut. I could see our smoldering campfire outside. Had he slipped out? We both scrambled out of the tent. The fire was still burning at half-life, casting a faint orange glow. Devon's tent was empty, the flap wide open. Neither he nor Duke was anywhere in sight. "Devon?" Jess called. Nothing. The silence felt oppressive, unnatural. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. Then a noise. A wet, ragged shriek from somewhere in the darkness. It sounded like a woman screaming, but distorted, as if submerged underwater. It made my skin crawl and every hair on my body stand on end. Jess grabbed my arm. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I said, voice shaking. "Duke! Duke! Come!" I shouted, my voice echoing. Silence. Then footsteps, slow and measured. A shape emerged from behind a thick stand of ferns. Devon. He approached the dying firelight, face slack, lips parted in a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. His hands were empty. "Where's Duke?" I demanded, stepping forward. "Did you see him?" Devon tilted his head, blinking too slowly. Then he pointed back into the trees. "Went that way," he said softly. I tried to follow. Lost him. Jess aimed her flashlight in the direction he indicated, revealing only more forest. My instincts told me something was deeply wrong. We heard another shriek, this time closer, echoing among the trees. My blood turned to ice. Devon smiled wider. I grabbed my flashlight and took a step toward the ferns, but Jess pulled me back. "We can't go blindly," she hissed. "Who knows what's out there?" I looked at Devon, my heart pounding. "Why did you leave camp in the first place?" He shrugged. "Couldn't sleep," he said. I heard something. Singing. There was a note in his voice that made my skin prickle. Singing? Just then, I caught a movement in the corner of my vision. Something white flitting between the trees, gone too fast to identify. Another shriek, cutting through my skull like a rusty blade. Devon's expression never changed. Jess and I shared a desperate look. She clenched her jaw, whispered, "We have to find Duke." I nodded. If he was in danger, I couldn't just abandon him. Devon offered to lead us, but Jess insisted on going ahead with the flashlight. Devon fell into step behind me. Something about that made me anxious. Having him at my back felt unnerving. We ventured maybe 100 yards from camp, the forest swallowing us. The humus was slick, and massive tree roots twisted across our path. The flashlight beam trembled in Jess's hands. My pulse throbbed in my temples. We found patches of disturbed moss where it looked like an animal or person had passed. But no sign of Duke. Then I saw it, near a large cluster of mushrooms, a single golden retriever hare caught on a broken fern stalk. I crouched to pick it up, feeling a surge of hope and dread. "Duke's been here," I whispered. As I rose, Jess's flashlight flickered, then winked out. She banged it against her palm, cursing. Devon's face floated in the darkness behind us, that grin barely visible. For a moment, we stood in near total blackness. Another shriek echoed, this time from behind us, near where the campsite was. The hair on my arms rose again. "Jess, get the flashlight working," I hissed. She fumbled with it, smacking it until finally it sputtered back to life. It illuminated a trunk covered in bright blue moss. Devon took a step closer, leaning in to study the moss. "This stuff looks unnatural," he breathed. It gleamed faintly, a bioluminescent glow. I'd seen mild bioluminescence in certain fungi before, but this was more intense. Jess reached out to touch it. I grabbed her wrist. "Don't," I warned. She nodded, swallowing. We turned to continue onward, and that was when Devon's voice spoke behind us. So flat and emotionless it gave me chills. "Wait." We pivoted. He stared at the moss, then scraped some off with his fingers, sniffing it. Before I could stop him, He smeared it on his tongue, like a curious child tasting something new. I gagged at the sight. "What are you doing?" Jess snapped. That could be poisonous." He just shrugged, that fixed smile still in place. "It's interesting," he murmured. Then he blinked once, slowly. "We shouldn't go any farther. Something's out there." Jess and I exchanged a look. "Then we go back to camp and wait for Duke to return," she said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. I was torn. Every instinct told me Duke was in danger, but there was a terrifying sense of primal fear in me, too. Another shriek cut through the silence, closer now. Then, from somewhere else in the forest, a howling or moaning wail responded. That's when I grabbed Jess's arm. "We're going back." We walked quickly, stumbling over roots. Devin followed, hands swinging at his sides in a strangely loose-limbed stride. I kept glancing back at him, that faint, unblinking grin lit by the flashlight's beam. Fear churned in my gut. We found our way to the clearing, half expecting to see Duke bounding happily toward us. But the clearing was empty. Worse, the smoldering fire was extinguished like someone had scattered the last coals. Our tents were still pitched, but the whole scene felt wrong. Something had changed in those few minutes we were gone. Jess lurched forward, shining the beam around in frantic arcs. Then she gasped. Near the base of her tent was a jagged tear in the fabric. Inside, her sleeping bag lay unzipped, splayed open as if someone had crawled out from within, and the zipper was undone from the inside. She looked at me, horror creeping across her face. I whispered, "Jess, you left that zipped up, right?" She didn't reply, just shakily reached in and pulled out the bag. It smelled of something foul, like stagnant water. Her face crumpled, tears welling. "Matt, this is messed up." Devin came up behind us, that half-smile unwavering. "Maybe you did it in your sleep," he suggested, voice flat. I bristled at how unfeeling he sounded. We huddled by the tents, uncertain what to do next. My watch, even though it was useless, told me it was still stuck at 2:14 p.m. My phone was out of battery. Jess's was nearly so. Devin's phone had presumably died as well. That's when the full, piercing scream erupted from the trees, a hideous, guttural wail that sounded like someone was being torn to pieces. It went on for a full 10 seconds, echoing off the trunks before tapering into a wet gurgle. Duke's bark rose in response, a desperate, frenzied barking that sent me sprinting toward the source of the sound without a second thought. I couldn't abandon him. Jess yelled after me, but the roar of adrenaline drowned everything out. I crashed through ferns and low branches, ignoring the sharp slaps against my face. My flashlight beam bounced wildly ahead of me. Duke's barking grew louder, more frantic, until it cut off with a sudden yelp. My stomach dropped. I burst into a small clearing ringed by thick moss. My flashlight caught a glimpse of something pinned to a twisted trunk. My mind refused to process it for a second, but then I recognized the shape of golden fur. Duke, suspended by metal hiking stakes through his shoulders, blood streaming down his flanks. His muzzle hung limp, eyes glazed. His intestines were coiled around the trunk, pinned like a grotesque offering. A wave of nausea crashed over me. I staggered, bile rising in my throat. I heard Jess behind me, gasping as she arrived and took in the sight. "Oh my God," she sobbed, dropping to her knees. "Oh my God, Duke." My vision blurred with tears. I stumbled forward, trying to see if there was any chance he was alive. But no. His eyes were vacant, a dull cloud reflecting my flashlight. Something had done this to him, something unspeakable. Then I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see Devin, that grin still in place, but his eyes glimmered with a cold satisfaction. My breath caught. "Devin," I choked. "Did you—" He didn't answer. Instead, he raised a hand, stared at the blood on his fingers. In the flashlight beam, I saw that it was fresh. My blood turned to ice. "Devin, Jess screamed, voice straining. "Tell me you didn't do this." He twitched like his muscles were spasming. Slowly, he turned his gaze toward Jess, that grin curving into something monstrous. "The dog knew," he said in a strangely doubled voice as if two people were speaking at once. "The dog knew what I was." Jess scrambled backward, eyes wide. I reached for the small hunting knife I kept in a sheath on my belt. My hand trembled so badly I could barely grip it. "Stay back," I warned, though fear made my voice quiver. Devin took a step toward me. "Aaron was easier," he whispered, the words dripping malevolence. I froze. My mind reeled. This thing, or whoever Devin had become, claimed it had something to do with my brother's death. Jess let out a broken sob, struggling to rise. A faint flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made me glance past Devin. In the darkness, a tall, ethereal figure drifted between the trees, mouth wide in a silent scream. Even in my terror, I recognized that shape from my nightmares. A banshee, or something like it, a ghostly wraith. Her hair floated around her skeletal face, eyes hollow, mouth contorted in a silent wail. My flashlight started flickering, the beam dying. "Jess, run!" I croaked, voice barely audible, but she stood, transfixed by the figure. In that split second, Devin lunged. I managed to dodge sideways, but he grabbed Jess by the shoulder and spun her around. She tried to scream, but he clamped a hand over her mouth. I struggled to get my footing, stabbing at Devin's back, but he moved with inhuman speed, twisting away. His arm whipped out, connecting with my ribs. Pain burst through my chest. I slammed against a tree, white spots dancing in my vision. Jess bit his hand, freeing her mouth. "Matt!" she shouted, voice ragged. I forced myself forward, ignoring the pain. This time, my blade found flesh, sinking into Devin's arm. He hissed, a wet, animal sound. He turned and backhanded me, sending me staggering again. The banshee's silent shape drifted closer, the air around us growing cold and thick. Jess broke free, stumbling toward me. "We have to go," she yelled. Before either of us could react, Devin grabbed the handle of my knife, still lodged in his arm, and pulled it out with a sickening squelch. Black fluid seeped from the wound. He smirked, as if amused by his own injury. Then he spoke, the doubled voice reverberating. "Leave if you can, but this forest is ours. He belongs here." He gestured at me with the bloody knife. I felt a rush of nauseating panic. Jess yanked on my arm, dragging me away. We turned and fled, stumbling through the undergrowth, branches whipping our faces. The shrieking wail of the banshee followed, echoing in the canopy. We sprinted without direction, consumed by the need to escape. My lungs burned and my side throbbed from where Devin had struck me. Jess clutched my jacket, half pulling me along. The forest blurred around us. I remember vaulting over a fallen log, nearly twisting my ankle. Every few seconds we'd hear distant rustling behind us or the faint hiss of that doubled voice. Eventually we collapsed in a small clearing ringed by dead spruces. I retched, tears streaming down my face. Duke was dead. My sweet, loyal dog, mutilated. Jess crouched beside me, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. We didn't speak for a long time, just stared at each other with mutual horror. What do we do?" she asked at last, voice hoarse. He's insane. Possessed. Something." I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. "We have to get out of here now." "My phone's dead. Your phone's dead." I glanced at the sky. The darkness felt absolute, as if even the moon refused to shine. I tried my watch again. It still read 2:14 p.m. My sense of time was hopelessly scrambled. Jess wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "We can try to find the main trail, or even a road. If we keep heading west, we should—" She cut off with a gasp as a shimmering shape flitted between the trees on the clearing's edge. The banshee again, silent but terrifying. It vanished before we could fully glimpse it. "Let's move," I said. We pressed on, hugging the edges of the clearing. Every step felt surreal, as if we were traversing an endless nightmare. The forest itself seemed to shift. Tree formations that should have been behind us appeared to our left or right. Vines coiled around our path, forcing detours that led us in circles. Once, we spotted a towering spruce we were sure we'd passed earlier, because of the distinctive lightning scar on its trunk. Jess was the first to realize we were looping. "We've been here before." She pointed at a broken branch lying on the ground with the smear of pink tape we'd used earlier. My heart sank. An echoing voice drifted through the trees, that doubled tone that belonged to Devon. "Maddie, don't you want to find Aaron?" I froze, my grip on Jess's arm tightening. The voice seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. For a while, we tried to ignore it. We stumbled on, fighting panic. Our flashlights dimmed to a weak glow. The forest thrummed with an otherworldly hum. Another half hour, or maybe an hour, passed in this disoriented trek. Time had no meaning. Then we found ourselves at the edge of another clearing. My stomach plunged when I recognized the remains of a half-dead spruce, our second camp. We'd circled back again. Jess let out a ragged sob. "No, no, please." Our tents were still there, though one was partially collapsed. The stench of rot and stagnant water hung in the air. I approached the collapsed tent, my tent, and found it slashed. The inside was drenched in some dark fluid that stung my nostrils. I recoiled. Jess clutched my sleeve. "We can't stay here. He'll find us." We heard a branch snap just beyond the circle of trees. We spun, hearts pounding. Devon emerged, his left arm slick with black blood that glimmered in the faint moonlight. His grin was so wide it looked painful, stretching the muscles of his face. "I told you. No escape," he murmured. His voice echoed as though from a deep well. I lunged for the campfire ring, which had some leftover wood. If I could create fire, maybe it would help. My rational mind was grasping at straws, but in so many myths, fire is a ward against evil. Jess tried to help me light it, but the lighter refused to spark as if the air was too damp or cursed. Devon advanced, raising my hunting knife. Jess grabbed a tent pole, brandishing it in trembling hands. He laughed, a wet, gargling sound. Then, from behind him, that spectral figure glided into view, the banshee, Kaelra. She towered. She, nearly translucent, her mouth wide open in a silent shriek. My mind threatened to shatter from the unearthly dread she radiated. Jess made a desperate swing with the tent pole. Devon sidestepped, then slashed at her with the knife, catching her in the side. She screamed, collapsing to her knees. I roared, adrenaline spiking, and tackled him from behind. We fell in a heap, wrestling for the blade. The stench of that black fluid burned my nostrils. I realized it wasn't normal blood, thicker, tar-like, reeking of decay. We rolled on the wet ground. My hand closed around a stone. I smashed it into Devon's temple once, twice. He let out a guttural snarl, but he didn't go down. His strength was inhuman. I felt my breath falter under his weight. His eyes bored into me, eyes that were no longer fully human. Then I saw Jess stagger to her feet, clutching her bleeding side. She found another rock, brought it down on Devon's skull with a sickening crack. He finally slumped, black fluid streaming from a gash. The knife fell from his grip. I kicked it away, breathing in ragged gulps. Jess collapsed again, pressing a trembling hand to her wound. My hands were slick with Devon's unnatural blood. I stared, half dazed as it hissed on my skin. The banshee floated behind him, her face still locked in that voiceless scream as though disappointed her puppet was down. I forced myself to my feet, heart hammering. "Jess, come on, we have to go," I panted. "We can't let him get up again." She nodded, tears streaming, pushing herself upright. Blood seeped through her shirt. We limped out of the clearing, not caring which direction we took as long as it was away. Branches slapped our faces, thorns tore at our clothes, but we pressed on blindly. time stretched in that gloom. Jess's breathing grew labored. I was terrified she'd collapse from blood loss. But we stumbled onward, fueled by pure fear. Eventually, after what felt like hours, the forest began to thin. We found a faint trail, overgrown but distinct enough to follow. My mind clung to it as a lifeline. At the end of that trail, we could see a partial clearing with a leaning signpost, some neglected route marker. As we pushed through the last stretch of ferns, we emerged onto what might once have been a ranger station site. A tiny wooden building slouched under a thick blanket of moss, windows shattered. A battered sign near the door read U.S. Forest Service, but the lettering was worn and chipped. The building looked decades abandoned. We hobbled to the door, forced it open with a creak. Inside, rotting floorboards sank beneath our feet, and the damp smell of mildew filled my lungs. Rusted furniture was fused to the corners of the room by fungal growth. Jess collapsed onto a moldy chair, wincing in pain. "We need to stop the bleeding," I said, my voice trembling with urgency. My pack was back at the second campsite, lost. But Jess still had her small day pack. She rummaged through it, pulling out a half-used roll of gauze, a small bottle of disinfectant. We worked together to bandage her side as best we could, ignoring how the fluid stained my hands. She bit her lip so hard I thought she'd draw blood. Finally, we wrapped her torso, the bandage already seeping red. I slid to the floor, leaning my back against the rotted wall. My body ached everywhere, my mind reeling. Jess pressed her palms to her face, shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice muffled. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" I rasped. She sniffled, tears streaking her cheeks. "Aaron. I didn't want to say anything, but I encouraged him to take that shortcut. He told me about his route, and I told him there was a better path to get closer to the river. I just wanted him to find something special to show you. I never meant for—" She broke into sobs. A numbness spread through me. Part of me wanted to rage at her, blame her for Aaron's death, but I realized that if I had been in her position, trying to help, I might have done the same. The forest, or whatever dwelled within it, had claimed him, not her. I reached out, touched her shoulder gently. "It's not your fault," I said, though tears blurred my vision too. A sudden crackle cut through the silence, making both of us jump. I realized it was an ancient radio on the decrepit desk, flickering with life. "Hello?" a distorted voice rasped. The speaker spat static, then died. My adrenaline spiked. I scrambled to the desk, fiddling with the knobs. The radio sputtered back. "Hello?" I spoke into it, my voice shaking. "Can anyone hear me?" Heavy static hissed, then a faint reply. "Matt? Aaron's waiting." My blood ran cold. The voice was a twisted imitation of a park ranger's calm tone, but it said my name, said my brother's name. Jess let out a strangled moan. I spun the knobs in desperation, but the static overpowered everything. Suddenly, the radio went silent, the light dying. No matter what I did, it wouldn't turn on again. We were alone, the building's silence wrapping around us like a shroud. "We should burn this place," Jess mumbled, half delirious. "Burn it all." The idea lodged itself in my mind. Fire. It felt like the only way to fight this evil. If we set a blaze, maybe we could force out whatever malevolent force controlled Devon or conjured that banshee. I wasn't sure, but a fierce desperation took hold. I helped Jess to her feet. She groaned, leaning on me for support. "We need fuel," I said. We searched the corners of the ranger station, hoping to find something flammable. In a back closet, we discovered 2 old metal fuel canisters. I shook them. One sounded empty, the other sloshed with some fluid. Maybe a gallon at best. "This could work," I said, voice grim. We hobbled outside, the gloom barely penetrated by what I assumed must be pre-dawn light. The sky was lighter, at least, a muted slate gray. Time had lost all consistency, but maybe we were nearing morning. We poured the fuel around the building's exterior, especially the moss-laden walls. The stench of gasoline filled my nose. My heart pounded with a wild, reckless hope that if we set a raging fire, it would scare away the unnatural presence holding us captive. I took Jess's lighter, tried to spark it. It took several attempts, my hands shaking. Finally, a flame flickered. I held it near the soaked moss, and with a whoosh, flames licked up the wall. It spread faster than I expected, traveling across the damp wood, fueled by something in that cursed growth. Within minutes, the whole station was an inferno, thick smoke billowing into the sky. We watched, half in awe, half in terror. The air grew scorching hot, embers crackling. Then an unearthly shriek sounded from within the flames, a keening wail that rattled my skull. Jess clapped her hands over her ears, staggering back. I did the same, feeling my knees threaten to buckle. The banshee's scream, or something akin to it, tore through the roar of the blaze. We stumbled away from the station, shielding our faces from the heat. Flames soared 20 feet high, turning the clearing bright orange. In that light, I saw a shape lurking among the trees, Devon. He stood just beyond the clearing, eyes reflecting the firelight, grinning that horrible grin. For a moment, he locked eyes with me, then turned and slipped away into the darkness, as if the fire didn't concern him at all. The heat pressed us back. Jess coughed, her bandage stained deeper red. We had to move or risk being trapped by the spreading flames. Crashing through the undergrowth, we found ourselves at the bank of a shallow creek. My lungs seized on the smoke, my eyes streaming tears. But we kept going, forging downstream. The sky brightened with the coming dawn. Even though we couldn't see the sun yet, the dim light felt like a lifeline. Maybe we could finally navigate. It was near that creek, after we'd stumbled downstream for at least half a mile, that we saw an old wooden sign marking a boundary. A barely legible arrow pointed left with the words, "Trailhead." Relief warred with skepticism. We followed it. About a quarter-mile later, we came upon a dirt access road. My heart soared. Civilization, or at least some path that might lead to it. We followed that road. As we did, the forest's oppressive hush lifted slightly, replaced by normal bird calls and the scurry of small animals. It was as if we'd passed out of some cursed boundary. I kept expecting to see Devon or hear that banshee's wail. Nothing. An uneasy sense that we were being watched lingered, but we pressed on with every ounce of willpower. Eventually, the dirt road joined a paved one. We found an old sign that read, "Forks, 10 miles." That sign was like a gift from heaven. Jess was nearly collapsing by then, her face pale. I half-carried her along the road until, by sheer luck, a battered pickup truck with a middle-aged couple inside drove by. They stopped, alarmed by our condition. We babbled about a monstrous killer, a forest gone wrong. They exchanged worried looks but helped us into the truck. They took us to the local hospital in Forks. At the hospital, Jess was rushed to surgery for her stab wound and severe blood loss. I was treated for bruised ribs, cuts, smoke inhalation, and acute stress. I kept trying to tell the nurses and the local sheriff about Devon, about Duke's murder, about the rotted supplies and swirling compass needles. They looked at me like I was insane, but they did file a missing persons report. Later, the sheriff's office called in a search team to check the area we described. They found no trace of my campsite, the second campsite, or any sign of Devon. No dog remains, no demolished ranger station. They claimed there was no record of a ranger station in that location. For days, I was questioned. My story never wavered, but the authorities chalked it up to a tragic mishap, maybe an animal attack. They speculated Jess and I got lost, delirious, perhaps consumed by hallucinations. Jess, recovering from her wound, refused to speak much about it. She just stared out the hospital window, eyes hollow. Eventually, we were released. I left contact information. The sheriff promised they'd keep searching for Devon. They never found him, or any evidence of wrongdoing, not even footprints that matched our claims. The entire forest seemed to have swallowed up everything that happened, leaving Jess and me holding memories like ticking time bombs. I returned to Tacoma, tried to salvage my life. I took sick leave from teaching for a while, but I was never the same. Jess moved away, or so I heard, after claiming she couldn't live in Washington anymore. We never spoke again after the hospital. I think the guilt and trauma were too heavy for both of us. Every night I dream of that shrieking wail, or of my brother Aaron's final steps into that cursed grove. I wake, drenched in sweat, my mind full of images of Duke pinned to that tree. Even in a crowded place, I sometimes see a fleeting shape at the edge of my vision, a tall, ghastly figure with a silent scream. 2 months later, something else happened. I was brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, when I saw a flicker of movement behind me. For an instant, the face reflected over my shoulder looked like Kaelra, the banshee. My heart seized. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the faint stench of stagnant water. I'd like to believe it's just my trauma messing with me. But deep down, I know it's a warning. The forest isn't done with me. And perhaps, one day, I'll have to return, if only to end this nightmare for good. But for now, I live with the dread, with the knowledge that there are places in the world where reality slips, where something hungers for lost souls, and time itself bends to unimaginable will. And in the silent corners of the night, I still hear that wet, ragged screaming, the banshee's lament echoing through the darkest reaches of my memory. My name is Jack Harmon. I'm 33 years old. This happened in late October 2024, up near the Twin Sisters Mountain in the North Cascades of Washington State. I have no clear explanation for what I saw and did during those freezing nights, and I'm not sure my mind will ever be the same. I grew up outside Bellingham, always hearing about the beauty of the North Cascades. My father was a passionate outdoorsman before illness claimed his strength. I wasn't some ex-military survivalist or anything close, just a man who'd gone on weekend hikes as a teenager, then drifted away from it all when life got complicated. This trip was supposed to be a return to nature and a chance to process my father's recent passing. I never stayed by his side in hospice. I couldn't handle watching him slip away, so I ran from that, just like I ran from everything. Guilt gnawed at me. So in a twisted sense, the idea of going alone, well, almost alone, since I had my dog, Daisy, felt like punishment, or at least an exile where I could think and maybe forgive myself. Daisy is a German Shepherd mix, 5 years old, rescued from a shelter I used to volunteer at. She's affectionate but vigilant, the kind of dog that stands guard even when she's fast asleep. We left early on a foggy Wednesday morning in my old Jeep, heading into the lesser-known logging roads beyond Mount Baker Highway. The route I planned would skirt the edges of the Twin Sisters Range, well off the usual trails. In total, I expected to be out 4 days. I told myself, fresh air, no distractions, just me, Daisy, and the wilderness. The first sign of trouble came with my phone battery. I turned on airplane mode, expecting it to last for days. Yet by noon on that first day, the phone was dead. No low battery warning, no unexpected usage, just a lifeless brick. I thought maybe the cold had sapped its power, though it wasn't that cold. I shrugged it off, more annoyed than anything. I had a physical map and compass anyway. We parked at a muddy pullout, nowhere near an official trailhead. My plan was to hike southeast, then cut west on a ridgeline that led to a secluded basin. Somewhere around there, I'd pitch my tent. We set off through tall pines and the hush of lightly falling leaves, the late autumn chill making Daisy's breath puff visibly. The quiet was immense. In a typical forest, you can still hear distant car engines, far-off planes, maybe other hikers talking, but not here. It felt like the world had paused. After a few hours of strenuous uphill, I paused to check my compass. The needle spun lazily, not settling on north. I tapped the glass, shook it, tried holding it level. It continued to waver in slow circles. That freaked me out a bit. I'd heard that large deposits of magnetite in these mountains could sometimes mess with compasses, but this felt extreme. I also discovered the map didn't quite match the ridgeline I was standing on. According to the topographic lines, there should have been a gentle slope. Instead, I was looking at a sharp drop on one side and thick forest on the other. I decided to keep going by instinct, sticking to what seemed like a relatively safe track. The sun was already lower in the sky than I expected. Time felt off, like I'd lost an hour or two without noticing. When the shadows grew long, I set up my small tent near a patch of scree beneath some twisted pines. The clearing was large enough to gather firewood. Daisy kept her ears pricked up, growling at the emptiness behind us. I tried starting a fire using tinder and matches. Usually, it only takes me a couple attempts. This time, the flame kept flickering and dying, even though the wood was dry. It took me maybe 15 or 20 matches to get a proper flame going. Even then, the fire never seemed right. Smoke drifted sideways in the strangest pattern, forming weird shapes in the cold air. I chalked it up to the wind shifting. Exhausted, I ate some energy bars and shared a bit of jerky with Daisy. She stayed close to me, rarely lying down. She kept scanning the perimeter of our campsite, occasionally letting out low whines. I remember pulling out my father's old pocket knife, flipping it open and closed just to calm my nerves. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, the sun was long gone, and a moonless sky pressed down on the mountains. The silence was absolute. No wind, no insects. Just my own breath and Daisy's restless pacing. Sometime past midnight, I heard what I thought was a voice. It wasn't loud, more like a whisper inside the tent. I bolted upright, heart hammering. Daisy was at the tent flap, quietly growling, hackles up. I couldn't make out any words, only the shape of something that might have been syllables. I unzipped the tent a bit, shining my flashlight into the dark. The beams hit nothing but rock, sparse grass, and pale boulders scattered around. My breath fogged the lens. Still, I felt a presence right outside. I didn't sleep well after that. In the morning, things got stranger. I found muddy footprints near the tent, bare footprints, smaller than mine. They seemed to circle the tent, then vanish into the scree field. Daisy sniffed them and let out a pitiful whine, as if spooked. Her tail stayed low, ears back, even after I patted her head. I tried to push away the dread that rose in my chest. We descended into a shallow canyon of granite and pine. Daisy discovered something partially buried near a boulder, a lone hiking boot. Inside it, I saw a cluster of what looked like rodent-chewed bones. They were small, maybe from a deer's leg or a person's forearm. I didn't stay long enough to analyze them further. The stench of rot clung to the rocks. I thought maybe an animal had dragged remains there, but it was odd to see them stuffed in a boot. We pressed on, my plan being to find a safer area with more stable ground. The scree was treacherous. By midday, I realized I was running in circles. I recognized the same bent pine with a lightning scar in its trunk. My map insisted I should have reached a vantage point overlooking a valley, but all I found were more rocks and twisted trees. The compass was still useless. The sun, I noticed, felt stuck in early morning light, even though my watch said it was nearly 2 in the afternoon. That made no sense, but I assumed maybe the clouds were playing tricks on me. It was around this time I saw a figure moving through the trees below us. Relieved to see another human, I headed down the slope, calling out. The man introduced himself as Ty Marshall, and he seemed about 28 or so, lean, with a scruffy beard. He wore muddy pants and a faded jacket that looked slightly too big. I asked if he knew the trail system around here. He laughed, said he'd come with a small group but got separated. He claimed they hiked in from Bellingham. I wanted details about the route he took, but he shrugged. I'm not exactly sure, he said, an uneasy smile crossing his face. "I'm just trying to find them again." Something about him felt off. He was too friendly, almost anxious to stay close, but my relief at not being alone overshadowed my reservations. We decided to share a campsite that night, gather more wood than I had so we could build a decent fire. Daisy, though, hated him on sight. She never barked or lunged, she just kept away, as if afraid to get too close. That evening, Ty and I sat around a weak, smoky fire, trading stories about our backgrounds. I told him about my father, about how I couldn't face hospice care. He nodded sympathetically, but his gaze seemed distant, like he was listening for something else. He said he'd once worked as a ranch hand in Idaho before drifting up here. The more he talked, the more contradictory his details got. One minute, he said he was from western Montana. The next, he mentioned a girlfriend in Tacoma. I brushed it off as nerves or confusion. After all, it was easy to get disoriented in this wilderness. We turned in early. I invited Ty to sleep near my tent or in a separate tarp shelter, but he insisted on making his own small lean-to about 100 yards away. Daisy and I settled inside our tent. Sometime before dawn, I awoke to the sound of laughter. Not normal laughter, something like a high-pitched giggle that echoed off rocks. It sent shivers through my spine. Daisy cowered, ears flattened. When I peered outside, I only saw Ty's silhouette against the faint moonlight, standing by a half-dead tree. His arms were at his sides, palms facing outward. I couldn't tell if he was the one laughing, or if it came from somewhere else. In the morning, my backpack was gone. I turned the campsite upside down, searching for it. No sign of footprints leading away. Ty arrived, claiming innocence. "I heard nothing," he said, lifting his hands as if he'd just woken up. Without the pack, I was left with minimal food. My canteen, stove, rope, everything was missing. Daisy's dog food was also gone. I asked if Ty would help me look, but he just stood there, shrugging, eyes flicking around. Eventually, he offered to go off on his own and see if he could find a vantage point or trail leading to civilization. "We can't stay lost," he said, a forced grin tugging at his lips. "I'll be back by noon." He left, disappearing over a ridge. Hours crawled by. Noon came and went, then 2 o'clock. I tried to build another fire. The flames sputtered with a greenish hue as if the wood were contaminated. My father's old pocket knife was one of the few items I still had. Daisy and I drank from a small creek, but the water tasted foul, metallic. I started feeling lightheaded. By the time Ty returned, the sun was already sinking. He came into the clearing looking dazed, his clothes soaked in something dark. My first thought was blood. He stammered out an explanation about killing a deer in self-defense, but I saw no meat, no knife, not even the carcass. He just had that red-brown stain on his jacket. When I pressed him for details, he got cagey. Daisy snarled at him, her hackles high. Ty glared at her in a way that made my stomach lurch. For a moment, his pupils seemed fully dilated, like a cat in low light. We made a tense camp that evening, me keeping well away from him. He pretended to doze off near the fire. I stayed half awake. Near midnight, I heard him mumbling something in a low, gravelly voice, as if reciting a prayer in a language I couldn't understand. My watch told me it was 2:17 a.m., but the sky looked like twilight, an eerie half-light that didn't belong to night or dawn. At dawn, or what should have been dawn, I found my sleeping bag unzipped from the inside. I'd been lying in it all night, so that made no sense. Daisy was gone from the tent, her harness left behind. I panicked. She was my only companion out here. I tore through the underbrush calling her name. Ty just stood there, arms crossed, watching me. His expression was blank. Eventually, I found Daisy's tracks leading into a dense stand of pines. The footprints ended near a series of half-buried boulders. A spiral of paw prints circled around as though she'd run in frantic loops. No other tracks. The ground was littered with droppings I couldn't identify. Small lumps of hair and bone, like something regurgitated by a predator. She was simply gone. I confronted Ty, demanding answers. Did he see anything? Hear anything? He smiled too widely, blinking too little. Why would I know? He asked, his voice unnervingly calm. Then he volunteered to help me look, and I felt a spike of dread. Something told me not to let him out of my sight. We spent most of that day scouring the perimeter. The forest felt wrong. Light angled through the branches in contradictory ways, bright and orange on one side like sunset, while on the other side the sky looked dull and gray. My watch started to skip hours. One moment it read 9:05 a.m., the next it jumped to 3:10 p.m., but the sun was still low. It was as if the entire mountain was caught in some cosmic glitch. Ty and I ended up back at the same clearing, as if we'd been traveling in a circle. He refused to say anything else about the deer's blood on his clothes. My hunger was catching up to me. My muscles ached, and my mind was in a constant swirl of fear for Daisy. Then, late in the afternoon, if it really was afternoon, I heard a faint whimper from across the scree slope. I sprinted toward it. When I found Daisy, she was lying on her side, behind a half-rotten log. At first I thought she was dead. Her legs looked contorted, her fur matted with some sort of gritty substance that sparkled like tiny stones embedded in her flesh. But her eyes were open. She was breathing shallowly. I saw that her hind leg bent at an impossible angle, as if her bones had been partially reshaped. She whined in recognition when I approached. Tears blurred my vision. I stroked her muzzle, murmuring to her that everything would be okay. Ty crouched behind me, silent, observing. After a few seconds, he said, "Might be best to end her suffering." I whipped around, rage filling me. He looked unnervingly calm. He even wore a slight grin, as if this was a minor inconvenience. I told him to back the hell away, which he did, slowly. I began looking for any supplies that might help me carry Daisy out of there, but I had almost nothing left. No backpack, no rope, no pack frame. Just my father's knife and some scraps of cloth. Without warning, Ty lunged at Daisy as if to break her neck. I tackled him before he could do it, slamming him onto the rocks. We grappled, my fists shaking as I tried to pin him. He was freakishly strong, his body shifting beneath me like a snake. I jammed my forearm against his throat. He hissed, baring his teeth. For a moment his face rippled, or so I thought, like his skin was loose around his skull. I managed to tear myself away, grabbing Daisy and dragging her behind a rock out of reach. Ty got to his feet, glaring with black eyes. I don't mean his irises were dark. I mean his entire eyes looked wrong, as though a film slid over them. He spat something at me in a language I didn't recognize, a guttural series of sounds. Then he walked off, leaving me trembling with fury and terror. I stayed with Daisy until nightfall, trying to stabilize her. She whimpered constantly, eyes darting around as if seeing something I couldn't. I tried to craft a makeshift splint for her leg using sticks and strips of my jacket. Her fur was stiff with that gritty substance that seemed embedded in her flesh, almost like fragments of stone. Each fragment was shaped like a tiny shard of slate clinging to her muscle. My hands shook as I pried some of them loose. Blood trickled out, thick and blackish. She cried out whenever I touched them. That night, with the temperature dropping, I built a small fire behind a boulder, partially sheltering Daisy and me. I had to gather wood from the hillside, but every time I ventured away, I felt eyes on my back. The forest was oppressive, branches leaning in from all sides. At one point, I heard what sounded like Ty's voice echoing through the trees, though I couldn't make out the words. The sky above flickered with faint lightning, even though there were no clouds. It was as if the entire place existed in some fractured dimension. Daisy's breathing steadied a little, but she refused to eat the scraps of jerky I had left. I dozed off in fits, nightmares plaguing my mind. In one dream, I saw my father in his hospital bed, calling my name while a dark figure with a crone-like silhouette hovered over him. Then the figure turned, revealing a face that was part rock, part rotted flesh. A voice rasped in my ear. "You left him alone. Why did you leave him alone?" I jolted awake to find Daisy staring at me, her eyes wide, reflecting the dim firelight. For a second, I thought I saw her eyes flicker black like ties, but maybe it was just the shadows. At dawn, if dawn is the right word, something changed. The sun seemed stuck just below the horizon, casting a perpetual half-light. My watch read 7:45 a.m., but the faint glow in the sky never intensified. I carried Daisy as best I could, though she weighed over 70 pounds. My arms burned, and every step on the loose rocks threatened to topple me. I kept telling myself I had to find a route out, some sign of civilization, or at least a vantage point from which I could see a road. After stumbling for what felt like hours, I came across an abandoned cabin, half buried in rockfall. The roof was partially caved in, and the walls leaned at odd angles. Maybe it had once been a prospector's shack. I set Daisy down carefully beside the door, her eyes rolling in pain. Then I ducked inside to see if there was any chance of shelter or supplies. The interior smelled of damp rot and something fouler underneath. Bones lay stacked along the wall, bleached and gnawed, arranged in neat rows. My stomach lurched as I realized some were definitely human. A rib cage here, a partial skull there. The remains of old hiking gear littered one corner. Moldy boots, a decaying backpack, rusted climbing gear. Torn notebooks were scattered about, pages yellowed and half-eaten by rodents. I picked one up and saw frantic scribbles. Day 14. Compass useless. Sun stuck overhead. Something in the walls. Day 27. Time doesn't move right. Heard Marcia's voice. She's been dead for weeks. Day 41. She wears the mountain. She's hungry. She's everywhere. I flipped through more pages, each more deranged. Some ended abruptly with large black scribbles. Others described people turning on each other, violent fights, references to a stone mother, or a mountain hag. My breath quickened. It felt like I'd stumbled on the remains of dozens of lost souls trapped by the same phenomenon. Outside, Daisy whimpered softly, so I forced myself to keep it together. Then I turned and nearly screamed. A figure stood in the doorway. At first, I thought it was Ty, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't him. The figure was taller, impossibly thin, draped in tattered fabric that clung to its body, skin the color of wet ash. It was a woman, or once had been, but her torso and limbs appeared elongated, as though stretched. Parts of her back and shoulders were embedded with black stone. Her jaw hung loose, revealing a dark maw. She stared at me with wide, sunken eyes, not blinking. A smell of death and cold stone wafted into the cabin. She whispered, "Jack," in my father's voice. My mind nearly broke. I stumbled back, dropping the notebook. She took a step forward, foot scraping the dirt floor. I saw that her left foot ended in a cluster of jagged rock instead of toes. Her mouth twisted, as though she was trying to form words she'd forgotten. Her voice came out in strange layers, like multiple people speaking at once. "Why did you leave him alone?" she rasped. "He died calling your name. You never came." I wanted to shout that it wasn't my fault, but the words stuck in my throat. My father and I never had a smooth relationship. He had a harsh way about him, and yet I loved him deeply. Walking away before his final moments was a regret that would haunt me the rest of my life. Hearing those accusations now, from this monstrous creature, felt like a punishment crafted by my worst nightmares. The figure lunged at me. I ducked aside, scrambling for the doorway, but she slashed at my arm. Pain flared as her fingers, tipped with stone-like claws, ripped my jacket sleeve. I managed to slip out, nearly tripping over Daisy. I heard the being hiss from inside the cabin, scraping against the floorboards. Holding Daisy's collar, I tried to pull her away, but I could feel her trembling. Her eyes were rolled back in terror. Then Ty appeared out of the trees, half-dressed in his tattered jacket, his face pale and smeared with dirt or dried blood. He was hunched, arms dangling at odd angles, eyes black. He advanced in a crouch, making a clicking sound with his tongue. I realized instantly that it was no longer Ty. Something else looked out from behind his eyes. He crawled forward in a spider-like motion, ignoring the normal mechanics of human movement. I still had my father's pocket knife in my pants. It was a flimsy blade, but it was all I had. As Ty lunged, I sidestepped, jammed the blade into his side. He shrieked, a high-pitched wail. His face contorted, momentarily revealing a twisted visage underneath, or a suggestion of something monstrous filling out his skin like a sock puppet. He collapsed onto one knee, but grabbed my wrist with horrifying strength. My bones felt like they would snap. I pulled away, leaving the knife in his side. The next seconds were chaos. Daisy let out a strangled growl, half rising and baring her teeth. The creature that was once Ty howled at her, then pinned me to the ground, one hand crushing my throat. Spots of light flickered in my vision as I tried to breathe. The woman with the stone foot emerged from the cabin, jaw quivering. I sensed they were connected somehow, like puppet and puppeteer. The stench of rot and earth filled my nostrils. Desperate, I grabbed a broken piece of wood from the ground and swung wildly at Ty's head. The blow connected, staggering him enough for me to slip free. I grabbed Daisy, hauling her onto my shoulder. She cried out in pain, but I had no choice. I stumbled away from the cabin, away from those horrors. My legs burned from the weight, but adrenaline drove me forward. Behind me, I heard them shrieking. Two voices overlapping in that terrible half-light echoing off the rocks. The air felt electric, as though a storm were about to break. I didn't stop until I reached a steep scree field where I nearly lost my footing multiple times. Daisy whimpered with every jolt. I clambered over a ridge, sliding on loose stones, only to find another slope of boulders. The terrain seemed endless, a labyrinth of unstable rock. Wind whipped around me, carrying the faint stench of decay. The sun remained stuck in that perpetual twilight. Eventually, I collapsed beside a large outcrop of granite that offered some protection from the wind. My arms trembled from carrying Daisy. My shirt was soaked in sweat, and my wounded arm throbbed. I noticed Daisy's fur had begun to change color around the embedded stone fragments, turning grayish at the tips. She barely moved, only giving soft whines when I touched her. For a long stretch of timeless half-day, I lay there, drifting in and out of a restless sleep. Images of the cabin, the bones, the monstrous woman, and Ty's shifting face haunted me in half-dreams. I felt as though the mountain itself was alive, that I'd stumbled into a place where reality was corrupted. Each time I woke, I checked Daisy, feeling her heartbeat to make sure she was alive. Her breath was shallow, but she still clung to life. When I decided we had to move on, I gathered whatever scraps of willpower remained. I used a piece of cloth from my jacket as a sling, hooking it around Daisy so I could half carry, half drag her. We pressed onward, following what might have been an old logging road now reduced to scattered gravel. My thirst was maddening, but I was terrified to drink from any streams. The last time, I'd tasted metal. My father's knife was gone with Ty. I had only a splintered length of wood as a weapon. Time lost all meaning. The sun didn't rise or set. Sometimes the sky dimmed slightly, giving the illusion of approaching night, then brightened again without any pattern. I'd glance at my watch and see random numbers, 4:12, 12:59, 9:23, none of which correlated to the light in the sky. The only measure of time was my exhaustion and Daisy's deteriorating condition. At some point, I noticed she stopped whimpering. Her breathing was so faint I had to lay my ear to her chest to feel it. Then, in what felt like mid-afternoon, I came upon a surprise. A muddy, rutted road with fresh tire tracks. My heart soared. I stumbled onto it, nearly weeping in relief. The tracks looked like they belonged to a large logging truck or some heavy machinery. I turned left, hoping it would lead downhill to an exit. My vision blurred from dehydration, every step a struggle, but adrenaline and desperation kept me moving. After maybe half a mile, I heard a rumble in the distance. I pressed Daisy to my chest. A logging truck appeared around a bend. It was an older model with the brand name half rusted off. 2 men sat in the cab, wide-eyed at the sight of me. I must have looked like a crazed, blood-smeared lunatic stumbling out of a nightmare carrying a half-dead dog. The truck screeched to a halt. The driver, a burly man in his 50s, hopped out and rushed toward me. "Jesus Christ," he said. "You all right? What happened to you?" I just shook my head, babbling something about being lost for days, about a cabin, about monsters in the mountains. He looked over my injuries, then pointed to Daisy. "Let's get you both in the truck." He and his partner helped me lift Daisy into the back, making a bed of old blankets. I collapsed, tears falling as I realized we might finally be safe. They gave me water, which I gulped, ignoring the rancid taste of the metal canteen. All the while, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting Ty or that woman to appear. But the road behind us was empty. We drove for what felt like an hour. Trees gave way to open patches of logged land. Eventually, I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember, the driver was shaking my shoulder, telling me we'd arrived at a small medical clinic in a logging town. They carried Daisy out. I tried to follow, but I was too weak to stand. Everything spun around me. My vision went black. I came to in a small examination room, hooked up to an IV drip. A nurse with kind eyes hovered over me. I asked where Daisy was. She said the dog was taken to a veterinary clinic across the street, but that I shouldn't worry. My body needed rest. I insisted on seeing her, so eventually they rolled me into a wheelchair and pushed me outside. What struck me immediately was how bright the sun was. Full midday rays lit the street. I asked the nurse what time it was, and she said 1:20 p.m. "It's November 14th, she added. My mind reeled. By my count, it should have been early November, maybe November 1st or 2 at the most. That meant I'd lost nearly 2 weeks, and that was if my memory was correct. Stunned, I let them push me into the vet clinic, but the veterinarian told me Daisy wasn't there. They had no record of any dog being brought in. I insisted that the men from the logging truck brought her. The staff exchanged uneasy glances. The nurse from the medical clinic seemed confused as well. She called the men who'd rescued me, but one was unreachable and the other said he only remembered me, not a dog. My blood ran cold. Was I delirious? Did I conjure Daisy's rescue in a half-dream? I begged them to call the driver in person, so they did. He arrived half an hour later, looking apologetic. He swore he found me alone on the road, that I was half-conscious, babbling about some Daisy. He thought it might have been my wife or daughter. I tried to argue, describing Daisy in detail. He shook his head sadly. "I'm sorry, friend," he said, "but you were all by yourself." I stared at his truck, searching for a trace of dog hair, a blanket, anything, but the cargo bed was pristine. My mind refused to accept it, yet the evidence was undeniable. That night I lay in the clinic bed, roiling in feverish nightmares. Images of the cabin, the bones, Ty's black eyes, the stone-embedded woman. But mostly I saw Daisy's twisted body, her eyes frightened as she tried to breathe through the pain. I awoke, drenched in sweat, tears on my cheeks, sure I could hear her whining outside my window. The next day, a pair of local deputies visited me. I told them my story, albeit leaving out the more supernatural aspects. I explained how Ty attacked me, how I found bones, how my dog was injured. They seemed polite but unconvinced. They asked for more specifics. I pointed to the cuts on my arms, the slash marks. They nodded but said, "This is Black Bear country. Maybe you got lost. You were hallucinating from dehydration." As soon as I was well enough to walk on my own, they let me go. I had no wallet, it was in my lost backpack, and no phone. The logging guys pitched in to buy me a bus ticket to Bellingham. On the ride back, the bus was filled with everyday people, kids laughing, a mom scolding her toddler, a couple napping. It felt unreal. I wanted to scream that none of them understood what lurked out in those mountains. When I arrived in Bellingham, I found out that I'd lost my job entirely. My freelance contracts had been canceled after I went missing for so long. My father had died 6 months prior, but even that seemed strange to me, like time had become unglued. I drifted from day to day in a haze, searching online for any mention of the cabin, the bones, the hag, or stories about the twin sisters. Most of what I found was standard myth or rumor, nothing that confirmed my experience. I never found any trace of Ty Marshall's identity. It was like he never existed. To this day, I sometimes turn a corner and catch a glimpse of a German shepherd trailing behind me, just out of sight. When I spin around, there's nothing there. I've asked local vets if anyone ever brought in a severely injured dog that matched Daisy's description. They all said no. Still, I swear she was real. I still remember the way her chest rose and fell in shuddering gasps, the way she'd nuzzle my hand for comfort. Late at night, I dream of returning to that mountain, of seeing the stone-limbed woman in the shadows. Sometimes I imagine how the cabin looked in flickering firelight, with mounds of bones stacked to the rafters. In those dreams, time is distorted too. The sun never moves in the sky, and I see countless sets of footprints circling my tent while I stand frozen. I've thought about going back, if only to search for Daisy or for proof. But a deeper fear stops me. If I stepped foot in those woods again, would I ever leave? And if I did, would weeks, months, or even years pass in the outside world while I lost myself in that place? I'm telling this story because I need someone to believe me. I need someone to confirm that time can break, that the land itself can consume you. No official report or Forest Service log is going to list ancient hag or possessed hiker as causes of lost travelers. But I know what I saw. I know what tried to speak to me in my father's voice. I can still smell its decaying breath. If you ever decide to venture deep into the Twin Sisters range, remember my warning. The mountain hungers. It preys on guilt and regret, warping time to trap you in your worst nightmares. People think the wilderness is just trees and animals, but there are older things out there, feeding on fear. They wait for the lonely, the desperate, the ones who run from responsibility. And once you've seen them, you'll never be free. I wish I could say I escaped, but some part of me is still on that mountainside, listening to the rocks grind and the wind carry that whisper of laughter. I can't tell you what's real anymore. Only that I left a piece of myself, or maybe my dog, behind in those twisted forests. And I'm not sure which haunts me more, the possibility that I survived while Daisy didn't, or the creeping suspicion that neither of us truly made it out. I keep waiting for the day the sun gets stuck in the sky again, for the phone to die prematurely, for some small footprint to appear in my home, circling my bed while I sleep. Maybe it's already happened, and I just haven't noticed. In this new reality, time doesn't always make sense. So, if you're reading this, and you're planning your own little healing trip into the mountains, you might want to reconsider, or, at the very least, bring someone you trust completely, someone you'd never betray, and who would never betray you. Because up there, anything can happen, and sometimes the mountains don't let you leave. Sometimes you just vanish, slipping through the cracks in time. I wish I had a neat moral to end this on, or an explanation that wraps it all up. I don't. All I have is dread. The forest, the scree slopes, and that thing wearing a woman's shape, they're still out there. If you ever hear laughter in the dead of night, or see footprints around your tent that end in the middle of nowhere, remember my words. Remember Daisy. Remember that something in those mountains wants your shame, your regrets, your life, and possibly more. If you're lucky, you might flee in time. If you're not, well, you'll end up just another pile of bones below Twin Sisters, and the world outside will keep on turning, oblivious, as though you were never even there. My name is Jake Monroe. I'm 32 years old, and this happened in late September of 2025. I'd come to Desolation Peak in the North Cascades of Washington state for some much-needed isolation. At least, that's what I told myself. What I found in those fog-choked mountains was something far beyond loneliness, far beyond anything I ever imagined. If I close my eyes now, I can still taste the cold wind, feel the sting of snow in my lungs, and hear a voice calling me from outside human reason. I don't know if writing this down will help, or if anyone will believe it, but it's the only way I might finally make sense of what happened. I'd been a warehouse worker in Seattle for nearly a decade, and I was never particularly ambitious. At least, that was what my bosses said when they let me go a few weeks earlier. The truth was, I'd been on a downward spiral since my younger brother's death. He drowned 2 years ago. I was there, but I'd frozen in a panic and failed to save him. Nobody blamed me outright, but the guilt sucked me dry, left me paralyzed at work, at home, in life. My performance tanked. I lost my job. My relationship fell apart. My friends drifted away. I told myself I needed a clean break, a chance to clear my head and finally bury the guilt that gnawed at me. Desolation Peak seemed the perfect place. Remote trails, an old fire lookout tower, and a chance to test my own resilience far from the city's noise. I packed lightly, brought my dog, Roscoe, a 4-year-old German Shepherd who'd been my constant companion ever since I found him at a local shelter. Roscoe was smart, loyal, but always a bit skittish around new people. He liked open spaces, though, so I figured the mountains would do us both some good. My plan was to hike up to the summit, set up a makeshift camp near the old lookout tower, and stay for a couple of weeks. No phone reception out there. A burner phone with limited battery, a physical map, some rechargeable batteries for my GPS, a flashlight, a tent, and enough dried food and water purification tablets for at least 14 days. That was the plan. The hike started well enough. The first day, I was all enthusiasm, breathing in crisp mountain air as I made my way through evergreen forests that soon yielded glimpses of jagged peaks. Roscoe trotted at my side, occasionally running ahead to sniff some interesting scent. I had read that the weather could change swiftly in the North Cascades, especially near Desolation Peak, but I wasn't expecting a sudden cold snap. By the second afternoon, black clouds rolled across the sky, blocking out the sun. A biting wind picked up, forcing me to put on extra layers sooner than I'd planned. Still, I tried to stay positive. I told myself a bit of adversity would help me focus, help me forget the city. On the second day, I reached the trailhead that would take me up toward Desolation Peak's summit. The path turned steep, and with the unexpected drop in temperature, I found myself struggling to catch my breath. Roscoe, for his part, was pulling on the leash, occasionally looking back at me. I took it as encouragement, my dog urging me to keep going. Late that evening, we arrived at a spot less than half a mile from the official summit. The fire lookout was hidden by fog, but I could see a faint silhouette perched on a rocky outcrop above the treetops. I pitched my tent in a relatively sheltered pocket near a cluster of wind-bent pines, then tried to start a small fire to warm us up and boil some water. That was the first moment I sensed something might be wrong. Every time I got the flame going, the wind kicked up, or a swirl of damp air smothered it. Once, the fire died for no obvious reason at all, though I had decent tinder and the conditions weren't that bad. When I finally did manage to keep a flame, the color flickered from the normal orange to a weird greenish-blue glow at the edges. Maybe it was just some chemical in the wood. I shrugged it off, warming my hands as Roscoe nuzzled me, but I couldn't shake a feeling, a tightening in my stomach, the sense that I wasn't alone. The wind through the pines sounded almost like voices. That night, I slept poorly. Around midnight, I woke to Roscoe growling. He stood at the tent flap, hackles raised. The moon's glow filtered through the canopy, but I saw nothing outside. A silent forest, still and oppressive. Eventually, after a tense minute, Roscoe settled, though he continued to stare out into the darkness. My heart pounded, but I told myself it was just an animal or the wind. After a while, I drifted back to sleep. Morning came with a dense fog that lingered well past sunrise. I unzipped my sleeping bag and realized, with a shock, that it was already unzipped from the inside, like someone else had climbed out of it. But Roscoe was still curled at my feet and I'd definitely zipped up before bed. Maybe, in my sleep, I'd done it unconsciously. Still, I felt unsettled. I packed up the tent and tried to check my GPS. Dead. No big deal, I thought. I had fresh batteries. When I switched them out, though, the device wouldn't power on at all. Strange, but I had my map. I told myself I could rely on my compass skills. I decided to take a look at the old fire lookout tower above. The steps creaked alarmingly, so I took it slow, letting Roscoe off leash so he could roam at the base. Inside, I found broken windows, scattered debris, and a thick layer of dust. Old logs from decades past, plus a battered bunk and a rusted stove. I brushed away cobwebs and uncovered a small, leather-bound journal under a collapsed shelf. Most of the pages were too water-damaged to read, but a few phrases stood out in thick, desperate pen strokes. He is here, smiling, always the same suit, no reflection in the mirror, and time is not what it seems. I woke to the sun setting twice. Then, near the back, don't believe him, he'll say anything. Followed by pages and pages of frantic scribbles. Reading that gave me goosebumps, but I told myself it was probably some bored caretaker or park visitor messing around. Still, the mention of a man in a suit in the middle of nowhere stuck in my mind. I put the journal in my pack. Maybe I'd examine it more later. The tower itself gave me the creeps, so I left quickly and called for Roscoe. He was nowhere to be seen. That was unusual. He rarely strayed far. Worried, I whistled for him, scanning the fog-drenched trees. After several minutes of calling his name, I heard him bark from somewhere downhill. I jogged through the undergrowth, stumbling on rocks and roots until I found him standing at the edge of a clearing, growling at nothing. He refused to move closer, so I finally clipped his leash and led him back to the trail. The next day, things started to get worse. The weather turned savage. The temperature dropped drastically and a freezing rain pelted the forest. Visibility was almost zero in the swirling mist. I tried to follow the map, but I kept running into weird discrepancies. A ridgeline that should have been on my left suddenly appeared to my right. A creek that was marked as half a mile down the slope abruptly emerged 10 steps away, nearly making me fall in. My compasses, 2 of them, started giving different readings. Even the physical map itself began to look smudged or altered, like the lines were fading or curving in new ways. At first, I thought it was just water damage or my own exhaustion, but it was too consistent, too uncanny. I decided to set up camp again rather than risk getting lost in unfamiliar terrain. That night, I tried once more to build a fire. It sparked to life, danced weakly, and eventually fizzled out. Roscoe kept pacing around, whining at the darkness. I cursed under my breath and went to bed hungry, wrapping myself and the dog in my sleeping bag for warmth. Sometime near dawn, I half woke to the sound of somebody speaking. The voice was low, gentle, almost melodic. It said something like, "I can show you the way out." My eyes snapped open, but I saw no one. It was pitch black with only the faintest glow on the horizon. Roscoe shuddered beside me, whining, but didn't bark. The next morning, I emerged from the tent to find it coated in frost, inside and out. My water bottle was partially frozen, and my food cache, tightly sealed, reeked of rot. I opened a packet of jerky and nearly vomited from the smell of decay. Every item of dried food was covered in a grayish fuzz. Impossible, I thought, for sealed packages to go bad overnight like that. Even my small stash of chocolate bars had turned chalky and moldy in less than a day. Shocked, I rummaged through my supplies, finding only a few snack bars spared from the rot. That left me with dangerously little to eat. I decided I needed to hike out. My original plan was 2 weeks, but I was hungry, freezing, creeped out, and the environment felt downright hostile. My phone was dead, and my GPS refused to switch on, but I knew I could trace my steps back, just follow the route I'd taken in. Halfway down the trail, though, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. I stumbled upon my own footprints from the day before, yet they seemed to loop back on themselves. Checking the map didn't help. The landmarks were off, or I was reading it wrong. 1 minute, I was sure I was heading south. The next minute, I'd see the old lookout tower above me again, like I'd circled around. Roscoe stayed quiet, ears flattened, occasionally sniffing the air and whining softly. The dense fog made every tree look identical. As the day dragged on, I found myself returning to the same clearing with the same cluster of boulders, even though I'd walked in a straight line for nearly an hour. My watch read 2 p.m., but the sun was already setting behind the ridges. I cursed at the sky. Either the days were shockingly short, or my watch was malfunctioning, or maybe I was losing track of time somehow. Tired and shivering, I set camp again that evening, building a crude windbreak from branches. My meager rations consisted of the last good protein bar and some water I'd managed to filter. I gave Roscoe half of it because his eyes had started to look sunken. The night was pitch black. I heard the wind, or maybe distant voices, whining through the pines. When morning arrived, if it really was morning, because the light was a pale, sickly gray, I unzipped my tent to find footprints outside that weren't mine. They were large, booted prints, too big for my foot, leading away into the trees. Roscoe had slept inside with me all night. We would have heard someone approach. Shaken, I decided to follow them, hoping to find another hiker or a ranger station. Maybe I could get help, or at least figure out where I was. The prints led downhill, winding through wet brush for nearly 2 hours, then abruptly ended in a small clearing. No sign of a trail, no sign of an exit. Just a clearing with an old stump in the center. The wind hissed, swirling leaves around my ankles. I looked up to see the shape of the old fire lookout tower still visible in the distance, like an ever-watchful sentinel. That was when I saw him, a tall man in a black suit. He stood on the other side of the clearing, partially obscured by fog. His posture was relaxed, hands in his pockets. I called out, "Hello." My voice echoed strangely. He didn't move for a long moment, then turned and walked into the fog. There was no trail behind him, no path I could see, yet he glided between the trees effortlessly. Roscoe started barking, a deep, furious bark I'd never heard from him before. I tried to follow the man, but he simply vanished. The only signs he'd ever been there were the footprints that matched the ones around my tent. Desperate for some semblance of warmth and security, I decided to go back to the old lookout tower. At least it had a roof of sorts. Maybe I could start a better fire there or find leftover supplies. It took the rest of that day to navigate my way back, and I only succeeded because the tower rose above the treetops as a dark silhouette. By the time I arrived, night was closing in again. Exhausted, I cleared a corner inside the tower, moving aside broken furniture and shattered glass. Roscoe seemed reluctant to enter at first. He whined, hackles up, but eventually followed me. By flashlight, I looked around. There was a rusted stove, but I couldn't get it to work. I found a cracked mirror on the back of a door. Something about it made me uncomfortable, so I covered it with an old tarp. I sat with my back against the wall, Roscoe by my side. I tried to read the water-damaged journal again. Flicking through the pages, I found references to a man in a suit who could appear and disappear at will, who whispered things at night and promised salvation. The handwriting became more frantic as it went on. He told me I could be free of my guilt if I just listened to him. He wants something. He wants me. Then, near the end, a final, almost illegible scrawl read, "Time is tearing. I have lived the same day 100 times. He says it's only been 2 weeks. My stomach churned. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I woke to Roscoe pacing nervously by the open door of the lookout. The door I had shut before going to sleep. That should have clued me in that something was very wrong. The air was icy, and outside, in the darkness, I saw a faint glow, like a lantern carried by invisible hands. I debated whether to investigate or not, but curiosity got the better of me. Leaving my pack behind, I stepped onto the rickety balcony with my flashlight. The glow faded, so I turned back, only to see a different glow now inside the tower. It was the mirror on the back of the door, uncovered, reflecting my beam. I had covered it, I was sure of it. My heart hammered. Roscoe whined, his ears pinned back. I reached out to cover the mirror again and caught sight of my reflection. My face looked gaunt, older. My eyes were ringed with deep shadows, as if I hadn't slept in days. Then, as I stared, the reflection moved on its own. My lips curled into a grin I wasn't making. I jerked away with a sharp gasp, stumbled back, and collided with the rotted wall. The reflection let out a silent laugh. It felt like the tower itself was tilting, spinning around me. Roscoe barked furiously, snapping me out of my frozen terror. I grabbed the tarp, tossed it over the mirror, and scrambled back. My flashlight flickered, and for an instant, I thought I saw a silhouette behind the tarp. Someone standing there, arms at their sides. Morning came in a sudden burst of pale light that felt unnatural, like a stage spotlight had been switched on. Roscoe and I were both exhausted, but I decided that no matter what was happening, I had to try to leave again. Staying in that cursed tower felt like I was inviting madness. I packed my gear and used what little energy I had to start walking southeast, intending to reach a trail that led back toward the nearest ranger station. My sense of direction was shaky at best, but I refused to give up. By midday, the sky had turned a strange grayish-green, and the temperatures dropped even further. A biting wind whipped the trees, carrying an almost electric tension in the air. It felt like a storm about to break. Roscoe went missing that afternoon. One moment he was sniffing the perimeter, the next he was gone. I spun in circles, calling his name, growing frantic. I searched the surrounding woods for hours, stumbling through thick underbrush, cutting my legs on briars. Night came fast. Again, faster than it should have. I lost track of time. My watch read 3 p.m., but the sky was dark as midnight. Desperate, I returned to the same spot. I set up my tent in a small hollow, hoping Roscoe would find his way back. I couldn't sleep, so I dozed fitfully, jerked awake every few minutes by the fear that something was approaching. Sometime in the darkness, a rustling sound made me sit up. I unzipped the tent to see Roscoe standing a few yards away. Relief flooded me, but then I noticed he was just staring at me. Not wagging his tail, not barking, just staring. I whispered his name. He didn't move. I shone my flashlight on him and saw dried blood matting the fur around his muzzle and chest. Horror spiked my pulse. "Roscoe," I called. He blinked slowly, then padded over. As he came closer, he let out a low rumble, almost a growl, but not directed at me, maybe at something behind me. I reached out to pet him. His coat was stiff with crusted blood. "Oh God, boy, what happened to you?" He didn't respond with his usual signs of affection. Instead, he looked at me with vacant eyes, tail low. As exhausted and frightened as I was, I tried to tend to him, wiping away some of the blood with a rag and giving him a bit of water. He lapped it mechanically, his eyes never leaving me. Something in me felt a cold swirl of dread, like I was looking at a stranger in my dog's body. I told myself it was just shock. But the next morning, I saw that Roscoe's left eye was bloodshot and glazed over, as if infected, and his movements were stiff, unnatural. We trudged on through the forest, but he never strayed from my side again. Occasionally, I'd feel his gaze on my back, and I'd turn to find him staring at me with that same unsettling emptiness. Soon, I stumbled on something I recognized, an outcropping of rock near a shallow ravine that I had passed on my first day. I felt a surge of hope. If I could follow that ravine, maybe I'd reach the next trail junction. My mind raced with the possibility of escape. I walked for hours along the ravine, ignoring the hunger gnawing at my stomach, ignoring the cold. But as twilight fell, if it was truly twilight, I found myself right back at the same outcropping, like I'd gone in a circle. Furious, I screamed into the wilderness. Roscoe stared at me. The sound echoed strangely, then died. There was no response except for the moaning wind. That was when I saw it again. A flicker of light through the trees, like a lantern. I followed it, snapping branches beneath my boots, adrenaline surging. The light led me to a cabin that had no business being there. It looked old, but well-maintained. Fresh paint, intact windows, a neat little chimney puffing smoke. In any normal circumstance, this would be a miraculous find, a sign of human presence and possible help. But something about it made my skin crawl. It felt out of place, like it had materialized from a different era. Roscoe whimpered behind me, but I pressed forward. I needed warmth, I needed shelter, and maybe whoever was inside could help me call for rescue. I knocked on the door. It swung open on its own, revealing a cozy interior lit by oil lamps. A small fire crackled in a stone fireplace. A table was set with a teapot and 2 cups. Sitting in a rocking chair next to the fire was the man in the suit. Mr. Ash. He turned his head slightly to regard me, smiling in a calm, predatory way. "Welcome," he said. His voice was warm, cultured. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." I stood there, frozen in the doorway, heart pounding. Roscoe refused to enter, instead letting out a low growl from the porch. My instincts screamed at me that this was all wrong, but my numb fingers and empty stomach pushed me to accept the man's invitation. "Who are you?" I managed. Mr. Ash stood and gestured to the table. "Just a fellow traveler," he said. "Call me Ash, if you like. I tend to these parts from time to time." His dark eyes never blinked. His suit showed no sign of dust or wear. It was as if he'd just come from a business meeting in a big city, yet here he was in the middle of the wilderness. Cautiously, I stepped inside, and he shut the door behind me, leaving Roscoe outside. For a brief moment, I felt guilt about leaving my dog out there, but I was desperate for some comfort. The air inside the cabin was remarkably warm, even though the fire was modest. My shivers subsided as I sat down at the table. Mr. Ash poured tea, the aroma oddly floral, yet slightly metallic. I barely noticed the taste as I sipped. It was warm and laced with something sweet. My exhaustion was overwhelming, and I felt my eyes droop. Mr. Ash smiled benignly, as though he'd just offered me a perfect hospitality. "You must be so tired," he said. I blinked, trying to stay alert. "How did you build this place out here?" I asked. "Are you with the Park Service?" He chuckled softly. "I'm with an older institution," he said cryptically, "one that offers relief to weary souls, like yours." His words slithered into my mind. Relief, I thought. Guilt welled up in me again. Memories of my brother's drowning, how I'd stood paralyzed on the shore, how I hadn't jumped in until it was too late. Mr. Ash leaned forward, pressing his palms together. "You know," he said, "there's a way to wash your hands of all that sorrow, to find true peace. Would you like that, Jake?" A shock of adrenaline snapped me out of my stupor. "How do you know my name?" I demanded. He simply smiled. "I know many things," he said. "Names, sins, regrets. I can carry these burdens for you if you let me." I pushed away from the table, my chair scraping the floor. My instinct was to get out of there, but I felt a powerful pull, like gravity from behind my eyes. The door was only a few steps away, but my legs felt weak. "No," I muttered, forcing myself to stand. I need to go." Mr. Ash sighed, a patient, condescending sound. "As you wish," he said, "but you'll be back. They always come back." Outside, I found Roscoe pacing anxiously, letting out short barks. The cabin door swung shut behind me without a sound. I marched away from the clearing, the frosty wind assaulting my newly warmed body, making me shiver violently. After a few minutes, I turned around to see the cabin again, but it was gone. The clearing was empty, just a stand of trees and boulders. No smoke, no door, no footprints. It was as if the cabin had never existed. My mind reeled. Fatigue overtook me, and I collapsed against a tree, hugging Roscoe close. I fell into a restless sleep, or fainted, I'm not sure which. When I came to, it was broad daylight, or at least a pale, dismal version of daylight. By my watch, it was 10 OM. But who knew if that meant anything anymore? Roscoe was lying in the snow next to me, shaking. Concerned, I checked him over. His left eye was almost entirely clouded and he wouldn't let me touch his paw. It was caked with dried blood. My dog was in bad shape. I cursed myself for not leaving earlier, for not bringing more supplies, for everything. But I had no choice now. I had to find a way out, or we'd both die here. With renewed determination, I hobbled in what I thought was a southerly direction, leaning on a makeshift walking stick I'd carved. My stomach growled painfully. I had no real food left, only half a protein bar that smelled borderline rancid. Roscoe wouldn't eat anything either. The day stretched on, with no sign of civilization, no sign of the trail. It felt like the forest itself had shifted around me, weaving a labyrinth. Despite that, I kept walking. My feet ached, and numbness gnawed at my hands. The wind cut through my jacket like knives. Then, late in the afternoon, I spotted something ahead. A figure curled on the ground, wearing clothes that looked strikingly familiar. My clothes. Shocked, I approached, only to realize it was me. Or rather, it looked like me, sleeping in a shallow depression in the snow. My mind couldn't comprehend it. My dog whimpered. As I got closer, the figure stirred, rising to its feet. The face that turned toward me was identical to mine, except the eyes were solid black. No white, no iris, just darkness. My double smiled too wide, revealing teeth that seemed impossibly long. "You're a coward," it said in my voice, but distorted like it was echoing in a cave. "You let him drown. You're letting this dog die too." My stomach flipped. Terror paralyzed me. I tried to speak, to deny it, but the words caught in my throat. The doppelganger stepped closer, each footfall silent. "You want to leave," it whispered, "but I'm already inside your mind. We can't leave what we are." Roscoe barked, lunging at the thing, but it simply vanished into a swirl of black smoke, leaving a faint sulfuric smell behind. I stood trembling in the snow, not sure if I'd gone completely insane. Hours or days passed in a blur. I lost all sense of time. Sometimes the sun rose twice in one day. Sometimes night lasted an eternity. I'd catch glimpses of Mr. Ash in the distance, standing beneath a tree or at the edge of my vision. I'd blink, and he'd be gone. At one point, I stumbled upon my campsite from 2 days prior, everything torn apart, my tent shredded. The footprints of large boots and dog paws circled the area. My supplies, long since ruined, lay scattered in the mud, and I thought I saw my own footprints leading away. Yet I had no memory of returning there. Roscoe's condition worsened. He limped, and his fur fell out in patches. I tried to carry him, but my own strength was failing. My vision blurred sometimes, and I found myself drifting in and out of delirium. Each time I dozed, I'd dream of my brother calling out to me from a black lake, asking why I hadn't saved him. I'd wake choking back a scream, or biting my tongue until it bled. Eventually, I decided to ascend again, to head back toward the lookout tower. Something told me it was my only chance to find a vantage point or get rescue. Maybe a helicopter would pass overhead, or maybe I'd find radio equipment in better shape. Maybe I just wanted to face the heart of this nightmare. So I pushed upward, step by agonizing step, Roscoe limping beside me. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the ridgeline battered by howling winds. Through a break in the storm, I spotted the tower up on a rocky crag. A flicker of lightning lit the sky, revealing fresh snow covering the slopes. We climbed on hands and knees over slick rocks, fighting the gusts. My fingers were numb, my lips cracked. As we neared the tower, I heard someone call my name. I turned to see Mr. Ash standing behind me, arms crossed. He didn't shout over the wind, but I heard him clearly as if he spoke inches from my ear. "You can't survive this," he said softly, "but you don't have to die here, Jake." Something in his tone was almost sympathetic, but I knew it was a ploy. I forced myself to ignore him, crawling onward. The door to the tower banged wildly in the wind when I arrived. I forced it open and staggered inside. A swirl of snow followed me, dusting the interior. Roscoe collapsed in a corner, panting. The place looked the same as before, though now the smashed mirror was partly uncovered. I glimpsed a fractured reflection, a shape moving behind me, but turned to find no one there. The stove was still rusted and useless. The journal lay on the floor, open to a page I hadn't read before. "He wants a host. He's searching for the weakest link." My teeth chattered as I read it. Without warning, Roscoe growled. I spun around to see him standing unsteadily, his clouded eye fixed on me. Then I noticed that the wind had stopped suddenly, as if someone had closed a door on the storm. In the hush, Roscoe bared his teeth. My heart broke to see my loyal companion transformed like this. His lips curled back unnaturally far, drool mingling with blood. His body trembled as if something inside him was struggling for control. I reached out, murmuring his name, but he lunged. His teeth snapped inches from my hand, forcing me to stumble back. Terror and heartbreak consumed me. Roscoe lunged again, jaws closing on the sleeve of my jacket. He tore through the fabric, almost biting into my arm. I had no choice but to fight back. I shoved him away with a booted foot. He snarled, eyes wild with agony and rage. In that instant, the door banged open, revealing Mr. Ash in the entrance, his face partially obscured by swirling snow. "Finish it," he urged me, voice calm. "He's lost to you." "No," I screamed, swinging the broken hiking pole at Roscoe, trying to keep him at bay without harming him. My dog leapt again, mouth open, and I reflexively drove the pole forward. A sickening impact. Roscoe yelped as the pole sank into his side. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. My beloved dog stared up at me, blood spilling from his wound. My throat constricted, tears burning my eyes. I never wanted this. I knelt, hands shaking, and tried to stem the bleeding, but his body convulsed, and he went still. I sobbed, pressing my forehead to his muzzle, my world unraveling in a flood of guilt and grief. A chuckle broke through my despair. Mr. Ash stood by the door, gesturing around the tower. The wind howled again. "Now you're truly alone," he said. I wanted to kill him, or to kill myself, or to collapse into the storm, anything to escape, but my fury at him and at myself gave me a final burst of resolve. I rose, gripping the bloody hiking pole like a spear. Mr. Ash watched me, unblinking. I lunged. He didn't move. The pole struck him in the chest, sliding in as though he were made of dense mud. His face twisted, not in pain, but in a grim mockery of surprise. Black tar oozed from the wound, coating my hands. He let out a low hiss. "You foolish mortal," he whispered. "This means nothing." But I saw a flicker of rage in his eyes, a tremor in the tower's floor. The air took on an acidic smell, and reality seemed to shudder around us. A horrifying screech reverberated as if from the foundations of the mountain itself. Summoning the last of my strength, I wrenched the pole free, sending a spray of inky liquid across the floor. Mr. Ash staggered, his composure faltering for the first time. "You have no idea what you've done," he spat. Then, like a shadow retreating from the sun, he disintegrated into swirling black smoke that escaped through the shattered windows. The entire tower groaned as if buffeted by a giant's hand. Snow blasted through the opening, knocking me down. Somehow, I managed to crawl outside. The storm battered me, hail and ice stinging my face. I had no direction, no sense of time. Everything was a haze of white and gray. But then, incredibly, I heard the distant thump of helicopter blades. I forced myself to stand, waving my arms frantically, screaming with a throat already ragged from the cold. Through the swirling snow, I saw a rescue helicopter hovering near the ridge, a searchlight piercing the gloom. I stumbled toward it, slipping on the icy rocks, half delirious. The last thing I remember was the blinding spotlight washing over me and the sensation of strong hands grabbing my arms. I came to in a hospital bed. The overhead fluorescents were painfully bright. An IV line snaked into my arm. My whole body felt like one giant bruise, and my left leg was immobilized in a cast. Confused, I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, my lips cracked. A nurse rushed in, calling for the doctor. They told me I'd been found near Desolation Peak, alone. The rescue team had been searching for me for months. Months. According to them, I'd gone missing back in June, and it was now October. But I could only account for maybe 2 weeks. The discrepancy rattled my mind. During my recovery, I had countless nightmares. I'd see Roscoe's final moments, or my own doppelganger's black eyes, or the smirk of Mr. Ash. Doctors told me I had severe frostbite in my toes, and I might walk with a limp for the rest of my life. My left leg had multiple fractures. My body was borderline malnourished, my mind likely traumatized by extreme stress and exposure. They asked about the dog, but no remains were ever found. They asked if I could explain why I had survived out there so long, but I had no coherent answer. After a few weeks, I could stand and shuffle to the bathroom with a walker. On one such trip, I noticed something in the mirror under the harsh fluorescent light. My reflection was standing a fraction of a second behind my actual movements. My heart pounded, a wave of dread washing over me. I stared at my reflection, watching for any sign of that slow grin, those black eyes. But I saw only my own haunted, hollow gaze. Yet the echo of my movements was enough to make me nearly collapse. I crawled back to the hospital bed, my mind spinning with the possibility that my ordeal wasn't truly over. It's been a few weeks since I was officially discharged. My leg is in a brace, and I'm trying to learn how to walk properly again. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up convinced I hear Roscoe whining or Mr. Ash whispering. The doctors call it PTSD, but it feels more real than that. I avoid mirrors whenever possible. I can't look at my reflection without half expecting it to move on its own. I wish I could say I've found closure, that I'm at peace, but I'm not. My name is Jake Monroe, 32, survivor of something I can't put into words. The Desolation Peak region has receded back into the quiet halls of memory for most people, but I'm living with the consequences. When I close my eyes, I still see that cabin, still feel that unnatural warmth, still hear Mr. Ash saying, "You'll be back." He wasn't wrong. Part of me never left those woods. Part of me died there with Roscoe. And part of me, whatever darkness followed me back, watches from behind every reflective surface, waiting for a chance to claim what's left of my soul. So that's my story. Believe it or don't. I write these final words with a trembling hand, glancing up every so often at the small mirror in my living room to make sure I'm still alone. I don't think I'll ever truly be free. The mountains changed me, or maybe something else crept into me when I was weak. All I know is that time isn't what I thought, reality isn't fixed, and the devils that roam Desolation Peak can wear our faces, or even the face of a beloved pet, promising peace and relief. Maybe that's the worst horror of all, that deep down, part of me almost wanted to say yes. My name is Lisa Greer. I'm 42 years old. This happened in late August of 2025. when I decided to take a solo RV trip to Alder Lake, near Mount Rainier in Washington State. I wish I could say this vacation gave me the clarity I was searching for. Instead, it showed me how easily reality can twist, how reflections can lie, and how sometimes you never truly come back once you've gazed into that dark water. I rented a small Class C RV for a week, thinking a lakeside retreat would help me reset. My divorce had just become final, and it felt like life had been spiraling ever since. I lost not only my husband, but also what little custody arrangement we had for our teenage son, Chris. I told everyone I wanted solitude, time to breathe, time to think, time to figure out who I was now. But deep down, I knew there was also guilt. I'd given up on the messy custody battle so Chris could stay in the city with his father, and part of me hated myself for it. When I pulled into the campground at Alder Lake, if you could even call it a campground, it was nearly empty. 1 or 2 sites were marked with old reservation slips, but nobody was around. The place was overshadowed by thick pines, and a creeping mist hovered over the water. The sky had been gray all day, the kind of weather that feels like the world's mood is matching your own. The little sign at the entrance said, "Welcome to Aldershore RV and Campsites," but it looked worn and half-rotted. It seemed nobody had bothered to replace or maintain it for a long time. I chose a spot near the water because I figured I'd enjoy the view. The small kiosk had a metal box where you were supposed to leave an envelope with your site fee. I dutifully stuffed $20 in the envelope and dropped it in. Nobody was in the camp office, so I figured that was that. The site I picked had a picnic table with peeling paint, a rusty fire ring, and a direct line of sight to Alder Lake. A lonely rowboat bobbed far off near the middle of the water, drifting with no one in it. Though at that distance I couldn't be sure. I parked the RV, hooked up to the meager electrical post, and tested the water spigot. The water spat out in a shaky stream, then settled into a steady flow. Good enough. My plan was to stay 4 or 5 days at least, maybe the full week if I was enjoying myself, even though I hadn't seen a single person yet. I noticed there was another RV about 50 yards away. Its windows were covered by curtains, the door closed. No signs of life, but it reassured me I wasn't completely alone. Maybe the owners had gone for a hike or run into town. I put on a self-help podcast, something about emotional healing after divorce, more to fill the silence than for genuine interest. Hearing someone else's voice comforted me, even if it was just tinny talk through the speaker. The first afternoon passed quietly. I ate a sandwich at the picnic table, jotted notes in my journal about how I wanted to do better for my son. I was still wearing my wedding ring out of habit, but I tried to force myself to slip it off, setting it on the table as a symbolic gesture. A chilly breeze picked up, making me realize the summer heat had started to wane early in these mountains. The water, a pale slate color, lapped gently at the shore. Occasionally, I swore I saw shapes beneath the surface, like the outlines of buildings or telephone poles. I remembered reading that Alder Lake was man-made, created by a dam that flooded an old town site. In certain conditions, you could see remnants under the water. I told myself that was all it was. Old structures, not illusions. That evening, I tried to make a simple dinner using the RV's stovetop. The flame kept sputtering, which was odd because I'd checked the propane earlier. It was plenty full. Every few seconds, the flame would flicker a strange blue-green color. I figured it had to be some impurity in the line. When I finally got a steady flame going, I boiled pasta, ate quickly, and decided to read a novel in bed before turning in for the night. Sometime around 9, I stepped outside. The temperature had dropped and the campground was utterly still. The lights in that other RV were off. Had they returned or never left? I couldn't tell. The lake was so calm it looked like a sheet of polished metal, reflecting the moonless sky. Fog clung to the shore, and I felt an odd prickling in my stomach, a sense that I wasn't alone, even though no one was in sight. I heard a splash in the distance, like a fish jumping, then silence again. I must have fallen asleep within minutes of crawling under the covers, because the next thing I knew, I was wide awake at some unknown hour. hearing a distinct tapping on the outside of my RV. It sounded like knuckles rapping gently on metal. My heart thumped. I forced myself to breathe, then got up, slid on my shoes, and grabbed a flashlight. I cracked the door open an inch. No one stood outside. My flashlight beam caught only the glint of dew on the grass. Telling myself it must have been a branch or an acorn dropping from a tree, I shut the door, feeling foolishly vulnerable in that moment. I had trouble getting back to sleep, my mind spinning through worst-case scenarios about prowlers, or maybe my anxious imagination conjuring noises. The morning brought sunshine, though it was watery and pale, filtered through clouds. I made instant coffee, enjoying the warm bitterness on my tongue, and stepped out to check the surroundings. The grass had a heavy dew, but more noticeable were the footprints. A set of wet footprints led up to the driver's side of my RV, then back toward the lake. They weren't mine. I'd been inside all night. They looked medium-sized, maybe a man's footprints, barefoot. I followed them until they faded into the gravel near the water. Unnerved, I approached the other RV and knocked on the door. No response. I couldn't hear any movement. Eventually, I convinced myself the occupant must have left, but there was no car or truck towing it. It was a Class A, bigger than mine, so if they drove off, I would have noticed. It gave me the creeps. Still, I told myself not to overreact. Maybe someone had gone for an early swim or was wandering around. The footprints could be from a curious hiker or some local who came down from a nearby road. Trying to be rational, I decided to go for a walk along the lake's edge to clear my head. I locked the RV behind me, pocketed my phone, still had decent battery life, and followed a narrow trail that curved around the shoreline. After about half a mile, I found a rickety dock and sat there, legs dangling over the water. The view was bleak, but strangely captivating. Evergreens on all sides, a mere flat lake, no birds, no boats, no voices. A voice behind me broke the stillness. Peaceful, isn't it? I nearly jumped out of my skin. Standing on the trail was an older man, tall, maybe in his 70s, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. His white hair was cut short and he had a kindly face with sharp eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, raising his hands. "Didn't mean to scare you." No, it's okay. I'm just jumpy," I said, my heart rate still high. "I thought I was the only one here." "Name's Gabe," he nodded politely. "Staying up at the campground. Saw your RV and figured I'd say hello." I relaxed a bit. "Hi, I'm Lisa. Yeah, I'm camped near the lake. I noticed another RV, but I haven't seen who's in it. Is that yours?" He shook his head. "No, mine's a smaller trailer. It's a ways back, near the trees. I like a bit more shade, but I saw you come in yesterday." I realized I must have missed his setup entirely. Perhaps I arrived while he was out. "Good to meet you. I saw footprints around my site this morning and thought maybe it was you." He frowned. "I don't go walking barefoot anymore, not with these old feet. Must be someone else." Then he attempted a smile. "Don't worry, I've been here for a week, and nothing sinister's going on as far as I can tell. Might be kids messing around." I wanted to ask if he'd seen the occupant of that other RV, but Gabe's expression shifted as if he already knew what I was thinking. "That big motorhome by the water?" he asked. "Not sure if anyone's in there. Been closed up since I arrived. Could be abandoned." We talked a bit more. Gabe was pleasant, but in that short exchange I noticed something off. He rarely blinked, and he had a slight delay in his reactions, as if he was thinking carefully before each response. I brushed it off as a quirk of an older man living alone, but it left me unsettled. He eventually left, heading back along the trail, and I decided to linger on the dock to gather my thoughts. The morning sun glimmered on the water, revealing shapes beneath the surface that had to be the remnants of the drowned town. Old legends said you could still see rooftops or telephone lines in the shallows. I stared, curious, until a wave of vertigo made me stop. When I got back to my RV, I tried calling my friend Kelly to update her that I was settled in. My phone wouldn't connect. The signal bar flickered, then dropped. I tried resetting my phone, but it remained useless. That was unsettling. I'd had decent reception just yesterday. Even the local radio on the RV's dashboard was static now. Hoping the service would come back, I fixed myself a light lunch and did some journaling to calm my nerves. I wrote about Gabe, about the footprints, about my unresolved guilt over leaving my son. I wrote to anchor myself. That evening, as I was deciding whether to try the campfire ring, the wood around here looked damp, Gabe came walking up to my site. He offered to help me test the electrical post because some of them short out. His voice was paternal, warm, but I couldn't shake an undercurrent of strangeness about him. He had a calmness that felt almost too calm, if that makes sense. He fiddled with the post using a multimeter. "Everything seems fine," he said, glancing at me. "Your rig's new?" "Rental," I clarified. "I'm not a real RV person, just needed some time away." He nodded, blinking just once in an unnervingly long moment. Good place for that, I suppose. After he left, I felt relief. Something about him put me on edge. I spent the rest of the night inside the RV, reading and occasionally glancing out the window at the other motorhome. Still no lights, no movement. It was as if a ghost had parked it there. Later that night, I woke again to the tapping. This time, it was more insistent. I crept to the window and peered out. In the moonlight, I swore I saw a figure pressed against the glass of that other RV, looking out from inside. But when I blinked, the silhouette was gone. Then I heard splashing near the shore. My skin prickled. I thought about going outside to investigate, but fear overruled curiosity. Morning came with an unsettling calm. The lake was absolutely still, a gray mirror reflecting the clouds. I set up my portable stove outside to brew coffee. While the water heated, I walked down to the water's edge to rinse my face. That's when I saw my reflection. I looked exhausted, hair messy, eyes puffy. But there was something else. My reflection's mouth seemed slightly open, even though my lips were closed. I leaned closer, feeling silly but also spooked. The reflection was normal again, matching my movements. Probably just a trick of the water. I hurried back to my little camp. When I opened the plastic bin of supplies, I almost gagged. The bread, lunch meat, and fruit I'd bought just 2 days earlier had all gone rancid. A pungent odor hit me. Everything was covered in a fuzzy grayish mold, far too advanced for just a day's spoilage. I tossed the container away, hoping I could buy more groceries later in the trip, though the nearest store was miles away. At least I had canned goods. That would keep me alive if I stayed. I spent the day reading about Washington's wildlife, half on the lookout for Gabe. I didn't see him at all, which was a relief and a worry at the same time. The other RV remained silent, curtains drawn. Around noon, I decided to try a short hike along the forest trail in the opposite direction from where I met Gabe. My goal was to see if I could get a better phone signal at higher ground. I packed some water, an energy bar, and my phone, then set off. Within minutes, the trail disappeared into thick brambles, as if no one had maintained it for years. The silence was oppressive. No birds, no wind, only my own footsteps. After an hour of pushing through the brush, I gave up. My phone still showed 0 bars, and the sky looked like it might rain. I trudged back, feeling a growing sense of unease, as though I was being observed. From time to time, I caught whiffs of a foul odor that reminded me of decaying algae or stagnant water. It came and went in pockets. By the time I got back, my legs were scratched up, and I was in a foul mood. At the campsite, I discovered my lantern was missing. I always keep it on the picnic table. Now it was just gone, as if someone had come by and taken it. I searched around, half expecting to find it knocked over, but no sign. I found a single wet footprint near the table, barefoot again, the same shape as before. My heart pounded. I scanned the area for any sign of Gabe or another person, but the site was empty except for me and my RV. Anxious, I retreated inside and locked the door. I watched the lake from my window. The day stretched on, and the sky's light began to fade early. When the gloom set in, I put on my overhead lights, read a paperback, and tried to ignore the restless energy in my stomach. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw movement near my driver's side mirror. I turned off the inside light, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. Slowly, I peered out. There was a reflection of a face in the side mirror. My face, but with an off-kilter smile. The hair was parted the same way as mine. I froze, adrenaline jolting me. It moved slightly as if tilting its head, but my head didn't move. My hands trembled, and I looked directly at the mirror. The reflection vanished, leaving just the dark shapes of trees behind me. I stayed still for minutes, feeling my pulse hammer in my ears. Had I just imagined that? Was it some kind of weird optical illusion? My mind raced to find a rational explanation, but none of them convinced me. Something deeply unsettling was happening here. I found myself remembering stories about that submerged town below Alder Lake, rumors of restless spirits or curses. I'd always dismissed that kind of talk, but now I wasn't so sure. I tried to sleep, but my dreams were full of watery images, houses underwater, face-like shapes swirling in the depths, and windows that looked back at me. A final dream featured me speaking in my ex-husband's voice, telling my son Chris not to come looking for me. I woke, drenched in sweat, my heart in my throat. The interior of the RV felt claustrophobic and smelled faintly of rotten food, even though I'd tossed out the spoiled groceries. In the gray dawn, I heard a knock on my door. Panicked, I sprang up and glanced out the window. It was Gabe. Reluctantly, I unlatched the door and let him in. He had a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He told me he'd found something of mine, my lantern, by the shore. He offered it to me. Indeed, it was my lantern, but it was crusted in lake mud, as though it had been submerged. I asked him how it got there. He only shrugged. "Might have rolled off your table," he said, which made no sense. The table was a good 20 yards from the water. "Gabe," I said, forcing a steady tone, "you're sure you didn't see anybody wandering around here?" He shook his head slowly. "Just you and me, of course." He paused. "You look tired, dear. This place can do that to you. My best advice is to pack up and leave if you feel something's wrong." I studied his face, noticing again how infrequently he blinked, how his expression seemed just a bit too neutral. My gut screamed that this man wasn't as benign as he pretended. I told him I might do just that, even though I had no idea if my RV would make it far without a real phone signal or a plan. Gabe patted my shoulder and said he'd be around if I needed help. Then he walked off in the direction of the big motorhome, which only heightened my suspicion. Was he staying in that rig after all? Determined to regain some control, I decided to start the RV, maybe drive into the nearest town. I unhooked the power cord, secured everything inside, and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine cranked but didn't turn over. I tried again. Nothing. I'd checked the battery voltage when I arrived and it had been fine, but now it was drained. My heartbeat quickened in frustration. I had a small solar panel, but it wouldn't be enough to jumpstart the engine by itself. I cursed under my breath. So much for a quick escape. Seething, I grabbed my phone, hoping maybe I could stand on the roof of the RV for a signal. When I pressed the power button, the screen showed a swirling pattern of static that quickly turned black. It was as if the phone had shorted out entirely. This was well beyond normal technical issues. It felt orchestrated. More and more, I sensed an intelligence behind every malfunction. In desperation, I marched over to the other motorhome. If Gabe was there, I was going to confront him, demand answers, or ride out. The windows were still drawn, the door locked. I banged on it, shouting, "Hello, is anyone in there? I need help." No response. After a couple of minutes, I gave up. I scanned the campsite for Gabe's smaller trailer, but found nothing. No other vehicles, no sign of a living space. The only places I hadn't searched in detail were the thick woods and the lake's far edge. Returning to my site, I noticed my footprints from before, but next to them was another set. Bare footprints that trailed behind me and then broke away, heading to the water. I swallowed hard, my nerves rattled. No sign of the person who made them. Needing some fresh air to clear my head, I carefully made my way down to the lake again. Mist was drifting in, swirling around the shore. The water's surface looked more like a mirror than ever, reflecting the dull sky. When I peered into it, I swear I saw entire buildings down there, like a miniature cityscape. Then the shapes shifted, and I realized they were twisted branches and logs. My reflection hovered in front of me, but it seemed to grin for a split second. I jerked away, chest tight with fear. I told myself it was a trick of the light, yet the memory of that grin remained, burned into my mind. I wandered a little farther down the shoreline, hoping maybe there was a better vantage point or a boat I could borrow. That's when I nearly stumbled over a figure lying in the shallows. My first thought was that someone had drowned. I let out a gasp, stepping back, but as I focused, I saw it was Gabe. He lay face up, half submerged, eyes open. I rushed forward, adrenaline surging, and leaned in to check for a pulse. His skin felt ice cold. Then he blinked, startling me so badly I fell backward into the water. He sat up abruptly, water streaming from his hair, his expression blank. "Lisa," he said, water dribbling from his mouth. I scrambled to my feet, my clothes soaked. "What the hell, Gabe? Are you okay? Did you fall in?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at me with that disquieting gaze. Finally, he smiled. "I'm fine. Went for a dip. Must have drifted off for a moment." "Drifted off? You were lying in the water." I stopped myself. Something here was horrifically wrong. The man was soaked to the bone, but he didn't shiver or act as if it bothered him. "Let me help you up." I offered a hand, which he took. His grip was clammy and strangely strong. As soon as he stood, I backed away. "You need, dry clothes. You'll catch hypothermia." He looked down at his dripping clothes, then back at me. "I'll manage." There was that half smile again. "You should be careful along the shore. It's easy to slip." I couldn't help noticing his eyes flicking to the lake's surface, as if checking to see if anything had changed below. A surge of panic coursed through me. I wanted to get away from him. I mumbled something about going back, turned, and hurried along the rocks, nearly twisting my ankle in my haste. Gabe didn't follow. When I glanced over my shoulder, I saw him standing ankle-deep in the water, staring out like a statue. My clothes soaked and my hair dripping, I returned to my RV, locking the door behind me. I toweled off, changed into dry pants and a sweatshirt, and ransacked my supplies for anything that could help me. I found a flare gun in the emergency kit. The rental place insisted on it for remote camping. That made me feel slightly less vulnerable. I also had a handheld flashlight, a first aid kit, and some canned food. My best plan might be to pack everything in a backpack and try to hike out in the morning. But the distances to the nearest town were huge, and the map I had was vague. Night fell swiftly. I heard no more knocking, but I also didn't dare look outside after dark. Instead, I turned on the small LED lights in the RV, trying to create a sense of safety. I found myself jumping at every creak of the metal frame, every rustle of wind. Finally, I drifted off, only to wake again to a dull thumping on the roof. My heart pounded. Thump, 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 like someone crawling around up there. I clutched the flare gun, unsure what to do. The noise stopped as suddenly as it began. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, trembling in silence. Dawn brought an oppressive grayness to the sky. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to leave. Even if it meant walking for hours, I'd rather face a long hike than endure another day of this unsettling presence. I packed a backpack with water, canned goods, a can opener, the first aid kit, the flashlight, my phone, useless or not, and the flare gun. I put on sturdy boots and stepped outside into the cold morning air. The other RV remained as silent as ever. Gabe was nowhere in sight, and I didn't want to look for him. Let him appear behind me if he must, but I was leaving. As I started down the dirt road that led into the campsite, something to my right caught my eye. Movement behind the curtains of the big motorhome. The fabric twitched like a hand pulling it aside. I paused, my stomach knotting. Should I see if someone in there could help me? Or was that a trap? Before I could decide, the door to that RV creaked open. I stood rooted, fear and hope mixing in my gut. A figure stepped out, a woman with shoulder-length hair, wearing jeans and a green windbreaker. She turned her head toward me, and my mind reeled. She looked exactly like me. I gasped, stumbling backward. The woman had my features, my height, even my posture, but there was something about her expression that was disturbingly serene. She wore the same wedding ring I'd left on the picnic table days ago. Worst of all was her smile, a slow, too-wide grin that stretched her face unnaturally. "Lisa," she said in my voice, though it was tinged with echo, as if two voices spoke at once. "You don't have to go." I clutched the flare gun, a wave of sheer panic overtaking me. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. She stepped down from the RV's threshold, bare feet touching the ground. I noticed water dripping from her pant legs, forming a small puddle. "No," I whispered. "You're not me. This is insane." She took a few steps closer, her movements calm. "Why leave, Lisa? You came here to find yourself, didn't you? Now you can stay and never be alone." I lifted the flare gun, aiming it at her, my hands shaking. Stay back." She paused, tilting her head. "We can share this place. Let me show you what's under the lake." Her grin broadened, revealing teeth that looked too sharp. "You've been carrying such guilt, such regret. It can end here." I trembled, fear and revulsion coursing through me. Every survival instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt locked in place. Then I heard a voice behind me, Gabe's voice. "Don't listen to her," he said, stepping out from behind my RV. He was still wearing those drenched clothes, only now they clung to him like second skin, dripping onto the dirt. "Lisa, come to the water. Let it wash away your pain." I realized, in that moment, they were the same entity, or maybe two aspects of something that lived here, something that could mimic, reflect, replace. The big motorhome was a lure, a stage. My mind flashed with the rumor of the drowned town. Could it be the presence of all those lost buildings, lost people? The lines blurred. I no longer knew if Gabe was part of it or if he'd been replaced from the start. I started backing away. My foot caught on a rock and I nearly fell. The version of me that stood there reached out as if to steady me, that chilling smile never leaving her face. "Just let go," she whispered. "Come see how peaceful it is under the water." Adrenaline surged. I yanked the flare gun's trigger, a wild shot aimed at the ground near her feet. A bright flash erupted, the acrid smell of burning chemicals filling the air. She recoiled with a hiss, water spraying from her body as if she'd been punctured. For an instant, her face distorted, a wavering image that peeled away like a reflection on disturbed water. "Lisa," Gabe hissed from behind me, "you shouldn't have done that." I spun around and saw him lurch forward, limbs bending oddly. His neck twisted with an audible crack and his eyes went fully black. I screamed, stumbling backward. There was no strategy anymore, just raw panic. I ran into the trees, flinging myself through the underbrush. Branches snapped under my boots, brambles tore at my clothes. I didn't care where I was going as long as it was away from them. My mind reeled with a single horrifying truth. They could copy me. I'd seen it, and if they could copy me, they could replace me. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs burned, sweat pouring down my face. Eventually, the land sloped downward, leading me to a small clearing where I could see the lake again. And in that clearing sat a wooden boat, half submerged in weeds. Desperate for any mode of escape, I dragged the boat free, ignoring the rotted planks and water sloshing inside. Maybe I could row across the lake, find some other shore with a road. It was a terrible plan, but I had no better option. I pushed the boat onto the water, the soggy wood creaking in protest. Using a broken oar I found nearby, I started paddling. My arms were on fire, my chest heaved, but I pushed through the water, expecting at any moment to see those creatures on the shore. The boat drifted out, away from land. The lake's surface was as calm as glass, my reflection shimmering below me. But I refused to look down. I kept my gaze locked on the far shore, a smudge of green and gray in the distance. Then, without warning, the boat jolted to a stop. It felt as though we'd run aground, but we were in the middle of the lake. Looking over the edge, I saw a dark shape gripping the hull from below, pulling us down. My mind reeled. Bubbles rose to the surface as the shape shifted. The boat started taking on water fast. I screamed, dropping the oar, trying to bail with my hands. The boat began to tilt. I tumbled into the water. It was shockingly cold, seizing my muscles. Instantly, I felt the lake's pull, as if unseen hands clutched my ankles. My head went under once, water flooding my nose and ears. Through the murky water, I glimpsed dim shapes, timbers, rotted rooftops, a ghostly outline of a building, and something else drifting among them, something with a pale face and hair fanning out like seaweed. I kicked, desperate for air. I surfaced, choking on the stale taste of algae. Clawing at the sinking boat, I realized there was no saving it. A moment later, it vanished beneath the surface with a quiet glug. Terror consumed me. I didn't have the strength to swim to shore if something was actively pulling me down. Yet I forced myself to try, each stroke a battle against the numbness in my limbs. An arm brushed mine. I turned to see myself in the water beside me, eyes open, hair floating. She smiled, then latched onto my wrist with impossible force. I kicked at her, screaming through the water. She pulled me downward, deeper, my lungs burning for air. Darkness clouded my vision. In a blind moment of desperation, I slammed my forehead into her face. My skull rattled, pain flaring. But she lost her grip, and I surged upward again. Gasping, I reached the surface, spitting water and flailing. The far shore was too distant. My only hope was to circle back to where I started. With no other option, I turned and swam that way, each stroke an agony of cold and fatigue. I expected that figure, my watery double, to yank me down again at any moment. But after a few more desperate strokes, I realized she wasn't there. Maybe I'd heard it. Maybe it was toying with me. I didn't know. It felt like hours, but was probably just minutes before my feet touched the muddy bottom near the shoreline. I staggered onto the beach, collapsing into the dirt and coughing up lake water. Every inch of me hurt. My lungs felt scraped raw. Slowly, I became aware of how silent it was. No wind, no birds, no sign of life, just my ragged breathing. I forced myself to my feet, swaying. My clothes dripped, leaving puddles beneath me. That's when I noticed footprints in the mud, my footprints leading into the water. Another set of footprints, also mine, headed the opposite way back into the campsite. Somehow, impossibly, I had walked out of the lake before I actually reached this spot. My head spun with confusion. My only thought was to get to the main road, even if it took all day, even if my body gave out. I headed toward the campground, praying I wouldn't run into Gabe or the other version of me, or anything else. But as I neared my RV site, I saw a shape moving around inside the open door of my vehicle. I crouched behind a tree, heart racing. Then I heard my own voice speaking softly. Peeking around, I saw a figure that looked exactly like me rummaging through the RV. She had her back to me, but the posture, the hair, even the clothes matched my older set, jeans and a jacket I'd brought with me. She turned slightly, humming a tune I recognized as one I used to sing to Chris when he was a child. A wave of horror washed over me. She was rummaging for something in my drawers. Then she lifted the phone I'd left behind, which was still dead, and studied it intently. I noticed the big motorhome was gone, completely vanished, leaving only tire tracks in the mud that led nowhere. as if it had never truly been there. My reflection, my double, seemed focused on her task. She didn't notice me creeping closer. I felt half crazed, all sense of reason overshadowed by the primal fear that I'd been replaced. If she left in my RV, the world might never realize it wasn't me. My ex-husband, my son, my friends, they would accept this imposter. I'd be forgotten, lost in the depths of Alder Lake. I remembered the flare gun. I dropped it in the forest while running. Despair filled me. I had nothing to defend myself with except my fists. The double stepped out of the RV, scanning the campsite with eyes that seemed too wide. She moved her jaw side to side as though testing it, then called out, "Lisa, it's okay. You can stop hiding. I'll take care of everything." Hearing my own voice from those lips almost made me vomit. A jolt of anger replaced my terror, and I lunged at her. She whirled, an unnatural speed behind her movement. We crashed to the ground. I tried to pin her arms, but she was strong, each limb like iron. She rolled me onto my back, pressing her forearm into my throat. Black spots danced in my vision. My chest burned, the taste of lake water still sour on my tongue. Summoning every ounce of will, I tore free, punching her in the side of the head. Her face twisted into a hateful snarl. My knuckles connected, and for a split second, her features flickered, revealing an inhuman visage beneath. Watery eyes, a slack mouth full of needle-like teeth. She made a guttural sound, part growl, part hiss. I scrambled to my feet, panting. She rose more calmly, adjusting her jaw as if realigning a dislocated joint. We circled each other. She spoke in my voice again. "Your life is wasted on you. Let me have it." I spat onto the ground, trembling with rage. "Never," I croaked, my throat raw. She lunged. I dodged, slamming my shoulder into her side. We both toppled near the picnic table. Desperate, I grabbed a broken piece of table leg and swung, catching her across the collarbone. She shrieked, water spurting from the wound like blackish fluid. Her eyes flared with hatred. Then, from nowhere, I heard a raspy voice call my name. "Lisa!" I glanced away for a fraction of a second. There stood Gabe, or the thing that wore Gabe's face near the water's edge. He looked half-melted, flesh drooping, eyes black. "Finish this," he hissed. "Come into the lake." That momentary distraction gave my double an opening. She yanked the table leg from my hands, threw it aside, and grabbed my wrist in a vice-like grip. I screamed as pain shot through my arm. She tried to drag me toward the shore. I fought back, kicking and flailing. Our feet churned the mud, each step bringing me closer to the water. I saw Gabe moving in from the side, his arms outstretched as if waiting to pull me under. In a last-ditch effort, I rammed my forehead into my double's nose. Pain exploded in my skull, but the force was enough for her grip to loosen momentarily. I twisted free, stumbling back toward my RV. My body felt broken, exhaustion pulling at me. The two creatures advanced, unstoppable, the reflection's face a mask of twisted hatred. Then I saw the flare gun lying in the grass a few feet away. Somehow, in my frantic flight, I dropped it there instead of in the forest. With a burst of hope, I dove for it, ignoring the flare of pain in my shoulder. My hand closed around the handle just as I felt a clammy grip on my ankle. Gabe had latched on, his nails biting into my skin. I kicked, aiming the flare gun downward. I squeezed the trigger. A searing burst of light and heat shot into him at near point-blank range. He howled, a discordant cry that rattled my teeth. Steam rose from his body as water spilled out from every seam. For a moment, I saw his face contort into a featureless shape, like clay dissolving. He collapsed, leaving a puddle of water and some tattered clothes. My double hissed and lunged at me. I swung the flare gun, empty now, bashing her across the temple. She staggered. Taking the chance, I scrambled upright and limped into the RV, slamming the door shut. Through the window, I saw her on her hands and knees, glaring at me with those black eyes, watery fluid seeping from her head wound. She pounded on the door, each thud shaking the RV. I searched the driver's seat, hoping a miracle might let the engine start. I turned the key, pumping the gas pedal. By some stroke of fortune or terror, the engine coughed, then rumbled to life. No time to wonder how. My double's pounding grew frantic, her voice rising to an unearthly wail. The sound scraped my nerves raw. Gritting my teeth, I shifted into drive, feeling the RV lurch forward. The reflection clung to the handle outside, shrieking, but momentum flung her off. I crunched over the empty campsite, weaving between stumps and rocks, aiming for the dirt access road that led back to civilization. Branches slapped the sides of the RV, the engine roared, and my entire body shook with adrenaline. I drove without a seatbelt, barely able to see through tears and the smear of mud on the windshield. In the mirror, the campsite receded behind me, the figure of my double growing smaller. For a second, I swore she sank into the ground as if melting into it. Then, she was gone. The rough road jostled my battered body, and I gripped the wheel as if it were my lifeline. My eyes darted to the side mirror. I saw my reflection there, pale, wide-eyed, but it matched my movements now. I forced myself to breathe, ignoring the dryness in my throat. The engine made a tortured sound, but it kept going. I had no idea how many miles to the nearest main road. I only knew I had to keep driving until I found help. After maybe an hour, the road improved, turning into cracked asphalt. My heartbeat never slowed, but the relief was immense when I spotted a sign for a convenience store ahead. I pulled in, my hand shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. The store windows glowed with fluorescent light, and a battered pickup was parked outside. Civilization. Safety. I staggered out of the RV, half expecting the reflection to leap out at me, but the lot was empty except for that pickup. Inside the store, an older woman behind the counter gave me a startled look, asking if I was okay. I probably looked like a drowning victim. I mumbled for help, water, a phone. She rushed around the counter, guiding me to a seat. As I sank into a plastic chair, she pressed a bottle of water into my hands, but all I could do was gulp air. She kept telling me to breathe, gently asking what happened. I choked out a few disjointed words about Alder Lake, about something chasing me. Eventually, she said she'd call the sheriff. While she phoned, I dared to glance at the store's large windows. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. For a moment, it seemed fine, mirroring my movements exactly. I exhaled a shaky breath, thinking maybe it was over, maybe I'd escaped. Then I noticed it. My reflection in the glass blinked just a fraction of a second too late. A cold dread spread through me as I realized the store was silent, the woman frozen mid-sentence on the phone. My reflection's mouth opened into that impossibly wide grin. No one else seemed to see it. Time resumed a second later. The woman kept talking, unaware. My reflection returned to normal, showing a battered, soaked woman. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, a slow descent into a reality I couldn't trust. Even as the sheriff's car pulled into the lot and 2 deputies stepped out, I knew I might never be free of that presence. They questioned me gently, asked if I'd been assaulted, if I had a medical condition. I mumbled about the lake, about something living there. One of them offered to check my ID. Another asked if I owned the RV. My words sounded incoherent, unhinged. They glanced at each other with a mixture of pity and skepticism. Somehow, I ended up riding with them to the local hospital. My mind was too frayed to protest. The last thing I remember was them helping me into the cruiser, my eyes flitting to the rearview mirror. In that mirror, my reflection's eyes stared back, and in them, I saw the vast depth of Alder Lake, an entire drowned town full of silent watchers. It smiled once more before matching my expression. I'd like to say I got therapy, that I moved on, that I put all this behind me, but I can't. I don't trust mirrors. I don't trust the shape of my own face in reflective surfaces. Most nights I dream of that watery copy of me, whispering from beneath the lake, coaxing me to return. And every now and then, When I catch my reflection in a random window, I see it blink out of sync or move an instant too slow. In those moments, I wonder if I truly escaped or if I'm just one more echo, walking around while the real me drifted away with the drowned bones of Alder Lake. Either way, my life is haunted by the knowledge of what lurks in still waters, and the relentless possibility that when you look into a reflection that doesn't blink, you might already be replaced,